Get those headphones back where you found them. You do not look like someone who belongs in this seat." The words sliced through the hushed atmosphere of the first-class cabin like shattered glass, sharp and impossible to ignore. Heads turned. Conversations paused. In Seat 1A of Global Journey Airlines Flight 437, Jasmine Reynolds felt her heart stutter in her chest as 20 pairs of eyes locked onto her. Heather Wilson, the senior flight attendant with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and 22 years of experience, loomed over the 17-year-old black girl, her professionally painted smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was used to having her authority respected, especially in her domain, the first-class cabin where the wealthy and powerful traveled in pampered isolation. What Heather did not know was that in precisely 18 minutes her entire career would come crashing down around her. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner, weighing 560,000 pounds and poised for takeoff to London, would remain firmly grounded on the tarmac. The 214 passengers on board would witness one of the most dramatic confrontations in commercial aviation history, and it would all happen because of a single phone call. This is not just another story about a rude employee having a bad day. This is about what happens when years of unchallenged prejudice collide with quiet power. It is about the moment when the established order is not just questioned but completely inverted. Have you ever been judged solely by your appearance? Ever been made to feel like you do not belong somewhere you have every right to be? If so, you will understand the cold knot of humiliation forming in Jasmine's stomach as Heather's voice rang out again. "I am waiting for an explanation. Those noise-canceling headphones are for first-class passengers only." Jasmine looked down at the sleek headphones on her console, the same ones that had been placed there before she boarded, the same ones that every first-class passenger received. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly as 20 strangers watched to see what she would do next. None of them, not even Jasmine herself, could have predicted how this confrontation would escalate. None of them knew that this seemingly minor incident would expose a pattern of discrimination that had festered unchecked for years. None of them realized that the unassuming teenager in Seat 1A was about to change an entire corporate culture with a single tap on her phone. If you have ever witnessed injustice and wished you could do something about it, stay with me, because what happens next is not just satisfying, it is revolutionary. But first, let me take you back 15 minutes earlier when Jasmine Reynolds first stepped onto the aircraft, carrying dreams as vast as the skies she was about to traverse. The hum of the Boeing 787's auxiliary power unit created a soothing backdrop of white noise as Jasmine Reynolds followed the red carpet pathway into the first-class cabin. At 17, her presence commanded a quiet respect that belied her age. Her dark eyes, keen and observant, took in every detail of the luxury surrounding her. The hand-stitched leather seats, the polished wood accents, the subtle lighting designed to mimic natural daylight. This was not her first time flying, but it was her first time in first class, and certainly her first time traveling alone internationally. The ticket had been a surprise gift from her parents, presented to her the night before departure in a simple envelope with a handwritten note. "To our brilliant daughter, fly like the star you are. We are so proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad." The memory of her mother's tears and her father's proud smile brought warmth to her chest as she located her seat, 1A, the coveted window spot at the very front of the aircraft. It was not just any seat. It was a private suite with its own sliding door designed to offer maximum privacy and comfort, the kind of luxury that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Jasmine placed her worn leather backpack carefully under the seat in front of her. Inside was her laptop, 3 different notebooks filled with coding notations, and a dog-eared copy of Algorithms to Live By, her favorite book on computational algorithms and human decision-making. The book was filled with her own annotations, complex thoughts in neat, precise handwriting that filled the margins. She was dressed comfortably but thoughtfully. Dark gray athletic pants and matching hoodie from a mid-range brand, Nothing flashy, but clean and neat. Her natural hair was styled in intricate box braids pulled back into a high ponytail, practical for the long flight ahead. No makeup adorned her face except for a light lip gloss. She had never been one for cosmetics, preferring to spend her time on code rather than contour. At 17, Jasmine was already something of a prodigy in computer science circles. Fluent in Python, Java, and C++, she had developed an algorithm at 15 that helped predict bias in artificial intelligence systems, work that had caught the attention of tech industry leaders and earned her an invitation to be the youngest ever keynote speaker at the Future Innovators Tech Summit in London. The algorithm had started as a personal project born from her frustration with facial recognition software that consistently failed to properly identify darker-skinned faces. Her solution was elegant and groundbreaking, a verification system that could identify when AI was making decisions based on biased training data. Major tech companies were already implementing versions of her work, and there were whispers of prestigious universities offering early admission. As she settled into the plush leather seat, Jasmine ran her fingers lightly over the polished wood grain of the console beside her. On it sat a pair of high-end noise-canceling headphones, still in their plastic wrapper, and a tablet preloaded with movies and music. A glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon had already been placed in the cup holder. Her mind was already rehearsing the opening lines of her keynote speech. In a world increasingly governed by algorithms, we must ask ourselves who writes these algorithms and whose experiences are they based on. When we feed our machines biased data, they will inevitably produce biased results. She had practiced the speech dozens of times in front of her bedroom mirror, but now, thousands of miles from home and about to address hundreds of industry professionals, a flutter of nervousness tickled her stomach. She took a deep breath. She had earned this opportunity through hard work and brilliant insights. She belonged here. Jasmine glanced at her phone. A text from her father had just come through, all checked in at the hotel. Call when you land, no matter what time. Your mother will not sleep until she hears your voice. Love you, Jazz. You are going to blow them away. Anthony Reynolds was her biggest champion. As Chief Technology Officer at Horizon Holdings, he understood better than most the significance of what his daughter had accomplished. He had always encouraged her to aim high, to never let anyone tell her what she could not do, and to always stand her ground when she knew she was right. He had also prepared her for the reality that as a young black woman in tech, she would often be underestimated, overlooked, or questioned. It is not fair, he had told her once, but knowing it happens means you can be prepared for it. Your brilliance will always speak louder than their prejudice, eventually. Jasmine slipped her phone into her pocket and pulled out her book, finding comfort in the familiar weight of it in her hands. She had 40 minutes before takeoff, enough time to review a few key concepts for her speech. Around her, other first-class passengers were boarding, each absorbed in their own pre-flight rituals. Businessmen typing furiously on laptops, couples sipping complimentary champagne, a woman in a designer suit arranging her expensive handbag just so. None of them gave Jasmine a second glance. To anyone paying attention, she was simply another passenger, albeit a young one preparing for a long-haul flight. To anyone really looking, she was the picture of focused intelligence, a young mind preparing to make her mark on the world. But no one was really looking. No one except for Heather Wilson, who had just stepped into the cabin and was surveying her domain with the critical eye of someone who had long ago decided who belonged in first class and who did not. And, in Heather's world, Jasmine Reynolds most definitely did not belong. Heather Wilson moved through the first-class cabin like a general inspecting her troops, each step precise, her spine ramrod straight, her uniform immaculate. At 45, she wore her 22 years of experience at Global Journey Airlines like armor. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun so severe it seemed to pull her features taut, creating a perpetual look of mild disapproval. Her makeup was flawless, but heavy. Foundation covering the fine lines that had begun to appear coral lipstick carefully applied within the lines. Flight 437 to London was Heather's favorite route. The transatlantic crossing attracted a caliber of passenger she preferred: business executives, politicians, celebrities, and the quietly wealthy. People who understood how the world worked. People like her, or at least people who she believed were like her. People who had earned their place through hard work and determination, not handouts or quotas. That is how Heather saw herself. Someone who had climbed the ladder through merit alone, conveniently forgetting her uncle, who had gotten her the interview. The supervisors who had overlooked her occasional tardiness because she reminded them of their daughters. The passengers whose inappropriate comments she had laughed off to secure better tips. With practiced efficiency, she scanned the cabin. Mr. Daniels in 2C, a finance executive who flew this route monthly, always ordered scotch with exactly 2 ice cubes. The Prestons in 3A and 3B, retired couple demanding but generous tippers. A famous actor whose name she could never remember in 4D, already wearing sunglasses inside, probably to hide a hangover. Then her eyes landed on 1A, and her mental catalog of acceptable first-class passengers experienced a critical error. A teenager, black, female, dressed in what Heather registered as casual clothes rather than business attire or designer labels, reading a book instead of tapping on a smartphone or laptop. Heather's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. In her mind, a series of assumptions clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Probably used someone else's miles. Maybe got upgraded by mistake. Could be some celebrity's daughter. Definitely does not appreciate what first class means. Most likely will cause problems during the flight. It never occurred to Heather to question these assumptions. In her mind, they were not assumptions at all. They were observations based on experience. The fact that her experience was filtered through a lifetime of unchecked biases did not register with her. The fact that she had mentally categorized a teenage girl as a potential problem before exchanging a single word with her seemed perfectly reasonable. Heather had always prided herself on what she called her intuition about passengers. She could spot trouble a mile away, she often boasted to newer flight attendants. What she called intuition was actually prejudice, a series of shortcuts her mind had created to make quick judgments based on appearance, accent, or behavior. The cabin is our domain, she had told countless trainees over the years. We set the tone. We decide who's having a good flight and who's not. This philosophy had never been challenged by her supervisors. In fact, Luis Hernandez, her manager for the past 8 years, had actively encouraged it. "You are the front line," he'd say during performance reviews. "I trust your judgment." The trust had been misplaced. Over the years, Heather had accumulated a file of passenger complaints. Snide comments to a Hispanic businessman who tried to order in Spanish, misunderstandings about seating that always seemed to affect passengers of color, selective enforcement of carry-on rules depending on how expensive the luggage looked. Each complaint had been handled quietly by Luis, buried under paperwork and dismissed as customer misunderstanding. Heather remained blissfully unaware that her behavior was problematic. In her mind, she was simply upholding standards. Standards that coincidentally aligned with her own biases about who belonged where. As she approached the young girl in 1A, Heather already knew how this interaction would go. She would be professional but firm. She would establish her authority. She would remind this girl that first class had rules, unspoken ones perhaps, but rules nonetheless. And she would make sure everyone else in the cabin witnessed it, a subtle reassurance to her real first-class passengers that she was protecting their exclusive space. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who had said the same words thousands of times without meaning them. "Welcome aboard Flight 437 to London." Heather's eyes flicked to the noise-canceling headphones on the console, still in their packaging but moved slightly from their original position. A perfect pretext. In her mind, this was a teaching moment, an opportunity to educate someone who clearly did not understand the protocols of first-class travel. It did not matter that other passengers had also moved their headphones. It did not matter that the girl had done nothing wrong. What mattered was establishing the hierarchy, reminding this girl that she was here on sufferance, that she was being watched, that she needed to be on her best behavior. Heather did not see herself as prejudiced. If asked, she would vehemently deny any bias. She saw herself as a professional upholding standards. She could not recognize that the standards she upheld were selectively enforced based on her own implicit assumptions about who belonged and who did not. As she stood before Jasmine Reynolds, Heather felt a familiar sensation, the small surge of satisfaction that came with exercising power. She did not know that this particular exercise of power would be her last. She did not know that the quiet teenager looking up at her with calm, intelligent eyes would be the catalyst for her downfall. She did not know that in less than 20 minutes she would be escorted off the aircraft, her career in tatters, her name about to become synonymous with corporate disgrace. All she knew was that someone was sitting in a seat where, according to her worldview, they did not belong. And Heather Wilson had appointed herself the gatekeeper of first class. "Those headphones are reserved for first-class passengers only," Heather said, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby passengers could hear. "I'm going to have to take them until we are airborne." Jasmine looked up from her book, momentarily confused. "I am sorry." "The headphones." Heather pointed to the noise-canceling headphones still in their sealed packaging on the console. "They are complimentary for our premium customers, but we do not distribute them until after takeoff." Jasmine glanced at the headphones, then back at Heather. "I have not touched them. They were here when I sat down." Heather's smile tightened. "Well, they should not have been. It is against our protocol." She reached down and picked up the package, her manicured fingers making a show of carefully inspecting the seal. "These are very expensive equipment. We need to make sure they are properly distributed." A businessman across the aisle was already wearing an identical pair, scrolling through his tablet. An elderly couple, 2 rows back, had theirs resting on their consoles, one package opened, one still sealed. Jasmine noticed these details in an instant, her analytical mind cataloging the inconsistency. "Other passengers already have theirs," she said quietly, not confrontational but simply stating a fact. Heather's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Our elite members have different privileges," she said smoothly. "I am sure you understand." The implication hung in the air between them. Jasmine could not possibly be an elite member, could not possibly belong to the category of passenger who received special treatment. The assumption was as clear as if Heather had shouted it. "I have a first-class ticket," Jasmine said, her voice level despite the flutter of indignation in her chest. "Seat 1A. "Yes, I can see that." Heather's gaze flicked over Jasmine's athletic wear, her lack of expensive accessories, her youth, her skin. "But there are still procedures to follow. I will keep these safe for you and return them after we reach cruising altitude." Before Jasmine could respond, Heather had slipped the headphones into her pocket and pivoted to the businessman across the aisle, Mr. William Peterson in 2D gray-haired, tailored suit, gold watch catching the light. "Mr. Peterson, can I get you anything before takeoff? Another scotch, perhaps?" Her voice had transformed warm and deferential now. "I am fine, thank you," he replied, barely looking up from his financial newspaper. Jasmine felt a hot flush creeping up her neck. She was not naive. She recognized what was happening. This was not her first encounter with prejudice, not by a long shot. Her father had prepared her for these moments, taught her how to respond with dignity rather than anger. "When people show you who they are, believe them," the first time he often quoted to her. "But never let them make you forget who you are." Right now, Jasmine was a first-class passenger with every right to be treated with respect. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Excuse me," she called, her voice clear but not raised. "I would like my headphones back, please." Heather turned slowly, her expression a mixture of surprise and displeasure. Passengers nearby had begun to notice the exchange. Thomas Grant, an older gentleman in 3A, lowered his magazine slightly. His wife Elizabeth frowned in confusion. "As I explained," Heather said, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child, "I will return them to you after takeoff. It is airline policy." "Could you show me where that policy is written?" Jasmine asked, still calm. "Because other passengers already have their headphones." The question, reasonable, direct, and impossible to answer honestly, visibly irritated Heather. For a brief moment, her professional mask slipped. "Young lady, I have been flying this route for 15 years. I know the policies. Perhaps on your next flight you will be more familiar with first-class protocols." The condescension was palpable. A few seats away, Sophia Ramirez, a younger flight attendant in her late 20s, glanced over with a concerned expression. She had been with Global Journey for only 2 years and had already witnessed Heather's selective enforcement of protocols on multiple occasions. Jasmine felt her phone vibrate in her pocket, probably another text from her father. She ignored it, focusing instead on maintaining her composure. "I understand there are protocols," she said evenly. "I am simply pointing out that they do not seem to be applied consistently. Could I please have my headphones back?" Heather's smile vanished entirely. "No, you may not. And if you continue to be disruptive, I will need to speak with the captain about your behavior." The threat hung in the air. Disruptive. The word carried weight in aviation. A passenger labeled as disruptive could be removed from a flight, even blacklisted from an airline. All for questioning why she was being treated differently than everyone else. Jordan Nelson, a 20-something white man in 4C, had begun recording the interaction discreetly with his phone, angling it so the camera peeked just over his magazine. He had recognized what was happening immediately, had seen similar scenarios play out in coffee shops, high-end stores, and elevators. The modern form of shopping, while black now flying while black. At the front of the cabin, Nicole Rodriguez, the Hispanic concierge responsible for greeting VIP passengers, watched with growing discomfort. She caught Jasmine's eye briefly and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent warning not to escalate the situation. Not because Jasmine was wrong, but because Nicole had seen how these confrontations typically ended. The passenger, especially a young black passenger, rarely won. Jasmine noted the warning. She also noted the smartphone recording, the watching eyes, the slight nod of agreement from Elizabeth Grant. She was not alone, even if she was isolated. "I am not being disruptive," she said quietly. "I am asking to be treated like every other passenger in first class." Heather leaned in, her voice low, but her smile back in place. "Honey, let me give you some advice. Being in first class is not just about having a ticket. It is about knowing how to behave. Now, would you like some juice before takeoff, or would you prefer to continue making a scene?" The dismissal was complete. Heather had categorized Jasmine's reasonable request as inappropriate behavior and offered her a patronizing off-ramp. The message was clear. Accept your place or suffer the consequences. Jasmine felt something cold settle in her chest. This was not about headphones anymore. It never had been. "Water, please," she said, finally, her voice steady despite the anger and humiliation churning inside her. "Thank you." Heather nodded, satisfied that she had won this small battle of wills, and moved away down the aisle, unaware that she had just lit the fuse on a much larger confrontation. William Peterson shifted uncomfortably in seat 2D as he pretended to focus on his Wall Street Journal. At 58, the investment banker had spent the better part of 2 decades flying first class across the Atlantic. He was accustomed to the routine. The champagne, the warm towels, the deferential service. What he was not accustomed to was witnessing such blatant discrimination happening right across from him. He glanced over at the young woman in 1A. She had returned to her book, her expression calm, but her posture rigid with tension. William had daughters of his own, though they were in college now. He tried to imagine how he would feel if someone treated them the way Heather had just treated this girl. William had always considered himself progressive. He donated to the right charities, hired diverse teams, attended the mandatory sensitivity training sessions. But he also knew that watching injustice without speaking up made him complicit in it. Still, confrontation was not in his nature. Maybe it was not that serious. Maybe he had misinterpreted the interaction. He took a sip of his scotch, the ice cubes clinking against the crystal tumbler, and tried to focus on his newspaper. The market was up 3 points. Somehow, it did not seem important anymore. 3 rows back, Thomas and Elizabeth Grant exchanged glances. Married for 42 years, they could communicate volumes without saying a word. Elizabeth's raised eyebrow said, "Did you see that Thomas's slight frown replied, 'Yes, and I do not like it one bit.'" At 73, Thomas had seen enough in his lifetime to recognize prejudice when it appeared. As a young lawyer in the 1970s, he had worked on discrimination cases, seen how systems were designed to keep certain people in their place. Retirement had softened some of his edges, but not his sense of justice. Elizabeth, a retired school principal, had spent her career advocating for students who were overlooked or underestimated. She leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better view of the girl in 1A. Such a composed young woman handling herself with remarkable dignity. "Perhaps we should say something," Elizabeth whispered to her husband. Thomas covered her hand with his. "Let's wait and see what happens next. If it escalates, we will speak up." In seat 4C, Jordan Nelson continued filming discreetly. At 27, the tech journalist had made a name for himself, covering the intersection of technology and social justice. His last viral article had exposed racial bias in facial recognition software, earning him both acclaim and death threats. He recognized a story when he saw one unfolding. The young woman in 1A seemed familiar to him, though he could not place her. A tech conference attendee, perhaps. He made a mental note to introduce himself later. For now, he kept his phone angled just enough to capture the first-class cabin without being obvious about it. Near the front galley, Sophia Ramirez arranged champagne flutes with mechanical precision, her mind elsewhere. 2 years as a flight attendant with Global Journey Airlines had shown her the unwritten hierarchies that govern the skies. Heather Wilson stood at the top of that hierarchy. Senior, respected, untouchable. Sophia had witnessed Heather's selective enforcement before the warm smiles for white executives, the cold efficiency for anyone who did not fit her mental image of a first-class passenger. She had seen passengers of color scrutinized, questioned, made to feel unwelcome through 1,000 tiny cuts. A delayed response to a call button, a forgotten drink order, a terse explanation of policy. Sophia had kept her head down, told herself it was not her place to interfere. She needed this job. The health insurance covered her mother's medications. The schedule allowed her to finish her nursing degree. But each incident chipped away at her self-respect, left her feeling complicit in something ugly. Today felt different. The girl in 1A was so young, her composure so remarkable in the face of Heather's thinly veiled hostility. Sophia caught the girl's eye and offered a small smile of encouragement before quickly looking away. It was not much, but it was something. At the cabin door, Nicole Rodriguez greeted late-arriving passengers with practiced charm. As the first-class concierge, her job was to ensure VIP passengers felt valued from the moment they stepped on board. At 34, she had risen through the ranks faster than most, her competence outweighing the occasional feedback about her accent or suggestions that she might be better suited to domestic routes rather than international premium service. Nicole had spotted the confrontation immediately. She had also recognized Jasmine Reynolds. Not by name, but by reputation. She had overheard the gate agents discussing the teenage tech prodigy who would be traveling in 1A. There had been specific instructions to ensure the unaccompanied minor had a smooth journey. Heather clearly had not gotten the memo, or worse, had chosen to ignore it. Nicole considered intervening, but experience had taught her the limits of her authority. Heather outranked her, had seniority, had the ear of management. A confrontation would only escalate the situation and might make things worse for the girl. Better to watch and wait, document if necessary, be a witness if things went further. She made eye contact with Jasmine, briefly tried to convey reassurance with a slight nod. The girl seemed to understand her expression, acknowledging the silent communication before returning to her book. These 5 observers, William the Grants, Jordan Sophia, and Nicole, formed a loose perimeter around the unfolding drama. Each registered what was happening through the lens of their own experiences. Each felt the discomfort of witnessing injustice. Each weighed their options, calculated risks, considered what actions they might take. None of them knew that very soon they would be more than observers. They would become participants, then witnesses, then ultimately part of a story that would extend far beyond Flight 437. For now, they watched and waited as the cabin filled with the remaining first-class passengers, as the pre-flight announcements began, as the illusion of normalcy settled over a situation that was anything but normal. And in Seat 1A, Jasmine Reynolds stared at the same page in her book, the words blurring before her eyes as she processed what had just happened and considered what to do next. The pre-takeoff routine continued around Jasmine. Flight attendants checking seatbelts, overhead bins closing with soft thuds, the captain's voice delivering standard announcements about weather and flight time. She had managed to refocus on her book, determinedly pushing the confrontation with Heather to the back of her mind. It was just headphones, not worth ruining her trip over. Then came the moment that changed everything. William Peterson raised his hand to get Heather's attention as she passed his seat. "Excuse me," he said. "I do not seem to have any headphones at my station." Heather stopped immediately, her expression shifting to concerned attentiveness. "I do apologize, Mr. Peterson. Let me check our supply right away." She disappeared into the galley briefly, then returned with a frown. "That is strange. We should have had a complete set for every seat." She glanced around, her eyes narrowing in thought. Then slowly, deliberately, her gaze settled on Jasmine. The cabin air seemed to grow thicker as Heather's posture changed her back, straightening her chin, lifting slightly. She was not just a flight attendant anymore. She was a prosecutor about to deliver her opening statement. "One moment, please," she told William, then turned and walked directly to Jasmine's seat. This time, Heather did not bother with the pretense of a smile. "Miss," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "I need to check your carry-on bag." Jasmine looked up, genuinely confused. "My bag? Why, we are missing a set of premium headphones, and I need to verify that they have not been misplaced." The emphasis on the last word made her implication clear. The accusation hung in the air, stunning in its audacity. Jasmine felt her cheeks burn as understanding dawned. "You think I stole them?" "I did not say that," Heather replied, her tone suggesting exactly that. "I simply need to account for all our equipment. It is standard procedure when items go missing." From across the aisle, William Peterson's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Wait a minute," he began. I was not suggesting. Heather held up a hand to silence him without taking her eyes off Jasmine. "This will just take a moment, sir. We take security and inventory very seriously in first class." By now, conversations throughout the cabin had ceased. Every passenger was watching the confrontation unfold. Thomas Grant leaned forward in his seat, his frown deepening. Elizabeth placed a restraining hand on his arm, but her own expression had hardened. Jordan Nelson was filming openly now, his journalistic instincts overriding discretion. Sophia Ramirez had frozen near the galley, a stack of warm towels forgotten in her hands. "I did not take anything," Jasmine said, her voice remarkably steady despite the humiliation coursing through her. "You took my headphones earlier, remember? The ones that were at my seat when I arrived." "Yes, and now Mr. Peterson's set is missing," Heather countered. "It seems like quite a coincidence." The accusation was absurd on its face. Jasmine had been in her seat the entire time in full view of dozens of passengers. The logical impossibility of her having stolen headphones from another seat without anyone noticing did not seem to factor into Heather's reasoning. "I have been sitting here reading my book," Jasmine said. "Everyone here has seen me. I have not moved." "Then you will not mind if I check your bag?" Heather insisted, reaching toward the backpack tucked under Jasmine's seat. That was the line. Jasmine could tolerate the condescension, the subtle barbs, even the confiscation of her headphones. But this public accusation of theft, this attempt to search her belongings without cause, it crossed a boundary she was not willing to accept. "Actually, I do mind," she said, her voice clear and firm. "You have no right to search my bag. I have done nothing wrong." Heather's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting resistance. Her authority was rarely challenged so directly. "Young lady, if you have nothing to hide—" "That is not the point." Jasmine interrupted, her composure still intact but her tone uncompromising. "The point is that you are singling me out based on assumptions. You did not ask to search anyone else's bag, just mine." The confrontation had escalated beyond headphones now. It had become about dignity, about refusing to be treated as inherently suspicious because of how she looked. William Peterson stood up from his seat, his financial paper forgotten. "This is ridiculous," he said, addressing Heather directly. "I simply mentioned that I did not have headphones. I was not accusing anyone of anything." "Sir, please sit down," Heather said, her professional veneer cracking slightly. "This is a security matter." "No, it is not," William replied, standing his ground. "It is a missing pair of headphones, not a security threat. And you are handling it inappropriately." Elizabeth Grant's voice came from 3 rows back, clear and carrying the authority of a woman who had managed school districts for decades. "Young man in 4C, I hope you are getting this on video." "Yes, ma'am," Jordan replied, his camera still recording. "Every word." Heather's face flushed red as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control, but rather than de-escalating, she doubled down. "If you refuse to cooperate," she told Jasmine, "I will have to involve the captain and ground security." It was meant as a threat, a final card to play to force compliance. Instead, it offered Jasmine exactly what she needed: official intervention by someone with more authority than Heather Wilson. "I think that is an excellent idea," Jasmine replied calmly. "Please do involve the captain. I would like to file a formal complaint about being falsely accused of theft and targeted for discriminatory treatment." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Around the cabin, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, unwilling to be drawn into conflict. Others watched with undisguised interest, mentally choosing sides. Sophia stepped forward from the galley, unable to remain silent any longer. "Heather, I just checked the supply cart. We are not missing any headphones. There must have been a mistake in the inventory count." It was a lifeline away for Heather to back down gracefully. But pride and something deeper, a fundamental unwillingness to acknowledge her bias, prevented her from taking it. "That is not the issue anymore," she said, not even looking at Sophia. "The issue is this passenger's attitude and unwillingness to cooperate with crew instructions." The pivot was transparent. Unable to sustain the theft accusation, Heather was now recasting Jasmine's reasonable self-defense as insubordination. "My attitude," Jasmine repeated, the first hint of incredulity creeping into her voice. "I have been nothing but polite while you have accused me of stealing, singled me out for different treatment than other passengers, and attempted to search my belongings without cause." The standoff had reached a critical point. Heather, backed into a corner of her own making, had 2 choices: acknowledge her error and apologize, or escalate further to save face. For a woman who had spent 22 years enforcing her version of order without consequence, there was really only one option. "I want to see your boarding pass," she demanded. "Now." Jasmine's heart pounded against her ribs as she reached for her phone to display her digital boarding pass. This was not her first encounter with prejudice, far from it. but there was something uniquely humiliating about being treated this way in a confined space surrounded by strangers with no way to simply walk away. A memory surfaced unbidden. She was 12, shopping for school supplies with her mother. They had entered an upscale stationery store, and Jasmine had wandered to a display of premium fountain pens while her mother looked at planners. A security guard had appeared beside her almost immediately. "Can I help you find something?" he had asked, his tone making it clear that the only thing he wanted to help her find was the exit. "I am just looking," she had replied. "These pens are very expensive," he had said pointedly. "Several $100s each." Before she could respond, her mother had appeared beside her. Dr. Vanessa Reynolds, pediatric surgeon, dressed in casual weekend clothes but carrying herself with unmistakable authority. "Is there a problem?" she had asked, her voice pleasant but her eyes steel. The guard had stammered an apology and disappeared. Later in the car, her mother had explained, "They see your skin before they see you, baby. It is not fair, but it is real. Never let them make you feel small. Stand your ground, keep your dignity, but always be strategic. Choose your battles wisely." Now, 5 years later, trapped in a metal tube at 0 feet altitude with a woman who clearly saw her as an interloper in first class, Jasmine considered her options. Was this a battle worth fighting? Or should she simply endure the humiliation until landing, then file a complaint that would likely disappear into corporate oblivion? She pulled up the digital boarding pass and held it out. "Here you go," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Heather scrutinized the screen as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. "Jasmine Reynolds," she read aloud. "Seat 1A. She swiped to check the flight details, the confirmation code, the ticket class. Everything was in order, of course. Jasmine had every right to be sitting exactly where she was. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across Heather's face, but it quickly hardened into renewed determination. "How did you get this seat assignment? First-class upgrades are not usually available to economy passengers." The implication was clear. Jasmine could not possibly have legitimately purchased a first-class ticket. She must have gamed the system somehow, manipulated her way into a space where she did not belong. "My parents bought me this ticket," Jasmine replied, fighting to keep the tremor out of her voice, "as a gift for my keynote speech at the Future Innovators Tech Summit in London." Even as she said it, Jasmine hated that she felt compelled to explain herself to justify her presence. No one had asked the businessman why he deserved his seat, or the elderly couple, or the man filming with his smartphone. Only her. A keynote speech. Heather's skepticism was undisguised. At 17, yes. Jasmine did not elaborate. She did not mention her algorithm, or the universities courting her, or the tech companies implementing her work. She should not have to recite her resume to be treated with basic dignity. Her phone vibrated with another text. Her father again. She glanced down at the message. "Everything okay?" "You usually respond right away. Just checking in." Her father. Anthony Reynolds, CTO of Horizon Holdings. The man who had taught her to stand her ground but choose her battles. What would he advise now? What would he do if he were here? Jasmine knew exactly what he would do. He would respond calmly but firmly. He would document everything, and he would ensure there were consequences. With a steady hand, she typed, "Having an issue with a flight attendant. Being singled out and accused of theft. Multiple witnesses. Will call when resolved." Her finger hovered over the send button. This was not just texting her dad anymore. This was setting something in motion that could not be easily stopped. Her father was not just any concerned parent. He was an executive at one of the most powerful technology companies in the world, a company with significant corporate partnerships, including one with Global Journey Airlines parent corporation. One text from her could potentially end Heather Wilson's career. Was that fair? Was that right? Jasmine thought about the other travelers who might face the same treatment. Ones without powerful parents, without witnesses filming, without the confidence to stand up for themselves. How many others had Heather humiliated, made to feel small, treated as inherently suspicious? She pressed send. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared as her father began typing. Then they disappeared, replaced by a simple message. On it. Stay calm. Document everything. Jasmine looked back up at Heather, who was still holding her boarding pass, still looking for some technical reason to challenge her right to be there. My boarding pass is valid, Jasmine said. I have every right to be in this seat. Now, is there anything else, or can I return to my book? The calm assertion seemed to infuriate Heather further. She was used to passengers who cowered, who apologized, who tried to placate her. Jasmine's composed resistance was something else entirely. Given your attitude, Heather said coldly, I am going to have to ask the captain about removing you from this flight. The threat hung in the air. Around the cabin, passengers exchanged glances. Jordan Nelson's camera kept recording. William Peterson shook his head in disbelief. Thomas Grant half rose from his seat before Elizabeth gently pulled him back down. My attitude. Jasmine repeated, genuine confusion in her voice. I have answered your questions. I have shown you my boarding pass. I have remained calm despite being falsely accused of theft. What exactly about my attitude justifies removing me from this flight? It was a reasonable question, and Heather had no reasonable answer. What she really meant by attitude was Jasmine's refusal to accept inferior treatment, her audacity in expecting to be treated with the same respect as other first-class passengers. Crew instructions are to be followed without question, Heather said, retreating to the safety of authority. That is federal aviation law. What instruction have not? I followed, Jasmine countered. Before Heather could respond, Sophia stepped forward again. Heather, maybe we should stay out of this, Sophia, Heather snapped. Go prepare the drink service. Sophia hesitated, clearly torn between professional obligation and moral conscience. Finally, with an apologetic glance at Jasmine, she retreated to the galley. Jasmine's phone vibrated again. Another text from her father. Do not engage further. Help is coming. 10 minutes max. 10 minutes. All she needed to do was remain calm for 10 more minutes. She could do that. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. If you want to involve the captain, she told Heather, her voice level, please do so. I have nothing to hide and have broken no rules. It was a direct challenge, and everyone in the cabin knew it. The battle lines had been drawn. On one side, a teenager armed with nothing but the truth and her own dignity. On the other, a veteran flight attendant backed by years of unchallenged authority and institutional power. What no one in the cabin knew, not even Jasmine herself, was that forces were already in motion that would transform this confrontation from a personal humiliation into a corporate earthquake. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay in our departure. Heather's voice cut through the cabin, artificially pleasant, but with an undercurrent of tension. She had positioned herself at the front of the first-class section, deliberately making a public spectacle of what should have been a private matter. We are experiencing a situation with a passenger that requires attention before we can proceed. Every eye in the cabin turned toward Jasmine. Some gazes were curious, others sympathetic, a few judgmental. Being the center of unwanted attention was its own form of punishment, and Heather knew exactly what she was doing. Flight attendants have authority under federal regulations to ensure all passengers comply with safety procedures and crew instructions. She continued, sounding like she was reading from a training manual. Failure to comply can result in removal from the aircraft. William Peterson stood up again. What regulation has she violated? She is sitting quietly, reading a book. Heather ignored him, focusing instead on making eye contact with other passengers seeking allies. We appreciate your patience while we resolve this matter. The comfort and safety of our premium passengers is our highest priority. The emphasis on premium was subtle but unmistakable, a coded suggestion that Jasmine did not belong in that category. From the rear of the first-class cabin, a security officer appeared, summoned by Heather via the interphone. He was young, barely 30, with close-cropped hair and an uncomfortable expression. His name tag read Taylor. "Officer Taylor, we have a situation with this passenger," Heather said loudly, pointing directly at Jasmine. "She has been confrontational and uncooperative with crew instructions." The security officer glanced around the cabin, clearly sensing that something was not right about this situation. "What is the specific issue?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Before Heather could answer, Jordan Nelson stood up. "Officer, I have video of the entire interaction. This young woman has done absolutely nothing wrong. She is being harassed for no reason." Murmurs of agreement came from several passengers. Elizabeth Grant raised her hand. "My husband and I have witnessed everything. This is completely inappropriate treatment." The security officer looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between protocol and the obvious reality that this was not a legitimate security situation. "Miss," he addressed Jasmine directly. "Can I see your boarding pass, please?" "Officer Taylor?" Jasmine replied calmly. "I have already shown my valid boarding pass to the flight attendant. I am a ticketed first-class passenger on this flight. I have not violated any rules or regulations. I am being targeted and publicly humiliated for no legitimate reason." Her composure was remarkable. A 17-year-old girl facing down authority figures who should have been protecting her rather than persecuting her. "The issue is not her ticket," Heather interjected. "It is her attitude and refusal to comply with crew instructions." "What instructions specifically?" Taylor asked. Heather hesitated, her narrative beginning to unravel under scrutiny. "She refused to let me inspect her bag when items went missing." "What items?" Taylor asked. "Headphones," Heather admitted reluctantly. "Premium noise-canceling headphones." The security officer's expression shifted from uncomfortable to incredulous. "You called security over headphones?" "Before." Heather could respond. A commotion at the cabin entrance drew everyone's attention. Two men in business suits were boarding the aircraft, followed by what appeared to be airline management staff. The cavalry had arrived. Throughout the escalating confrontation, Jasmine had maintained a composure that belied her 17 years. While her heart raced and her stomach churned with humiliation and anger, she kept her breathing steady, her voice even, her posture upright but relaxed. This was a skill she had learned over years of being the only black girl, the youngest person, the unexpected presence in spaces where others questioned her belonging. Her father had once told her, "Your silence can be more powerful than their noise. Do not waste energy fighting every battle with the same intensity. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to be moved." So she sat in seat 1A, exactly where her ticket placed her, exactly where she had every right to be, and she did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She did not plead. She simply stated facts calmly and without apology. "I have a valid ticket. I have not stolen anything. I have broken no rules. I will not be treated differently than other passengers." Each statement was a brick in a wall of quiet dignity that Heather Wilson kept crashing against, growing increasingly frustrated by her inability to provoke an emotional response that could be labeled as disruptive or aggressive. When Security Officer Taylor had asked for her boarding pass, Jasmine had complied without comment, letting the evidence speak for itself. When he asked if she had taken anyone's headphones, she had simply said, no, offering no defensive elaboration. When he asked if she was traveling alone, she had said, "Yes, but my father is aware of the situation." The simplicity of her responses created a stark contrast with Heather's increasingly agitated state. The more calm Jasmine remained, the more Heather's actions appeared disproportionate and unprofessional. Jordan Nelson, still filming from 4C, captured this contrast perfectly. The poised teenager versus the increasingly flustered flight attendant. The narrative was writing itself in real time and not in the way Heather had intended. When the men in business suits appeared at the cabin entrance, Jasmine felt a surge of relief quickly tempered by uncertainty. Were they airline executives? Airport security? She could not be sure. But their presence shifted the energy in the cabin immediately. Authority had arrived, but whose side would it take? She caught Officer Taylor glancing toward the newcomers with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Clearly, this situation had escalated beyond what he had expected to handle. "Miss Reynolds?" he said quietly, leaning closer to Jasmine. "I apologize for the disturbance. For what it is worth, I do not see any issue with your behavior. Just sit tight for now." It was a small gesture, this acknowledgement from a person with some measure of authority, but it steadied her. She nodded her thanks, then turned her attention to the unfolding scene at the front of the cabin. The first man to enter was tall and imposing with salt and pepper hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. Behind him came a younger man with a tablet scrolling rapidly through information. 2 airline staff members in management uniforms followed, looking tense and alert. Heather straightened her posture clearly, recognizing the first man, her expression shifting to something like deference mixed with confusion. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, using her customer service voice once again. "I was not aware you were traveling today. We are just handling a minor situation with a passenger." "Ms. Wilson," the man interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying authority, "I am not traveling. I am here regarding a situation that was brought to my attention minutes ago. Richard Blackwell, Senior Vice President of Customer Experience at Global Journey Airlines, rarely visited aircraft personally. His presence on the jet bridge was unprecedented, a fact not lost on anyone in uniform. Heather's composure faltered visibly. "Sir, I was just following protocol for—" "We will discuss protocols privately," he interrupted again. "Right now I need to speak with Ms. Reynolds." Jasmine felt a momentary surge of panic. How did he know her name? Then she remembered her text to her father. This was the help he had promised. Blackwell approached Jasmine's seat, his demeanor shifting from stern authority to something more gentle. "Ms. Reynolds, I apologize for interrupting your journey. I am Richard Blackwell, Senior VP at Global Journey. May I speak with you privately for a moment?" Jasmine glanced around the cabin, aware that every passenger was watching this interaction. The public nature of her humiliation had been part of its sting. Any resolution should be equally public. "Anything you need to say to me can be said here," she replied, her voice steady. "Everyone has already witnessed what happened." Blackwell nodded, understanding her reasoning. "Very well. First and foremost, I want to apologize for the treatment you have experienced today. It falls well short of our standards and values as an airline. The official acknowledgement, delivered clearly for all to hear, was powerful. Around the cabin, passengers relaxed, slightly sensing justice was being served. "Thank you," Jasmine said simply. "I understand you are traveling to London for the Future Innovators Summit, where you will be delivering a keynote address." Blackwell continued. "We are honored to have you on our flight and regret that your experience has been tarnished by this incident." Heather's face paled. The disruptive passenger she had been attempting to remove was not just a regular teenager, but a VIP speaker headed to a prestigious international event. The realization seemed to hit her like a physical blow. "The situation will be addressed," Blackwell assured Jasmine. "In the meantime, is there anything we can do to make the remainder of your journey more comfortable?" Jasmine considered for a moment. She could ask for an upgrade to an even more premium seat demand compensation or request special treatment. Instead, she said, "I would like my headphones back, please. And I would prefer a different flight attendant to serve the first-class cabin for the duration of this flight." It was a measured response, not vengeful, not demanding simply a reasonable request to be treated with basic dignity for the remainder of her journey. Blackwell nodded. Of course, that can be arranged immediately. He turned to the younger man with the tablet. Mr. Foster, please ensure Ms. Reynolds receives her headphones and that cabin service assignments are adjusted accordingly. Then he turned back to Jasmine, his expression serious. We would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you more thoroughly upon landing in London, if you are willing. Your insights could help us address the underlying issues that led to this situation. It was a corporate response, carefully worded, but also an acknowledgement that the problem went beyond one flight attendant's behavior. I would be happy to share my perspective, Jasmine replied. Throughout this exchange, she had maintained her composure, neither gloating in vindication nor shrinking in continued humiliation. Her silent resistance had transformed into silent strength, the power of someone who knew they were right and refused to be treated as less than. Across the aisle, William Peterson nodded in approval. The Grants exchanged satisfied glances. Jordan Nelson continued recording, capturing the airline's public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And Sophia Ramirez, watching from the galley, felt a mixture of relief and admiration for the young woman who had stood her ground with such dignity. The presence of airline executives had shifted the power dynamics dramatically, but the passengers of Flight 437 were not finished having their say. As Richard Blackwell turned to leave, William Peterson rose from his seat in 2D, straightening his tailored suit jacket with the confidence of a man accustomed to boardroom confrontations. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwell," he called, his voice carrying the authority of his 60 years. "Before you go, I think it is important that you understand exactly what happened here from someone who witnessed it all firsthand." Blackwell paused, turning back to face the cabin. His expression was neutral but attentive. "Of course, sir. Your perspective would be valuable." William gestured toward Jasmine. "This young woman did absolutely nothing wrong. Nothing. She was reading quietly when your flight attendant approached her, confiscated the headphones that were at her seat, headphones that every other passenger in first class was allowed to keep, and then later accused her of stealing another passenger's set." "That is not exactly," Heather began, but William cut her off with a raised hand. "I am the passenger whose headphones were supposedly missing," he continued. "I simply mentioned I did not see any at my seat. I never suggested anyone had taken them. Your employee jumped to that conclusion and publicly accused this girl of theft without a shred of evidence." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin. Blackwell's expression remained professional, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he took in this information when Miss Reynolds quite reasonably objected to having her bag searched based on an unfounded accusation your employee threatened to have her removed from the flight for having a bad attitude. William continued. "I have been flying first class with Global Journey for 15 years. Mr. Blackwell and I have never seen a passenger treated this way. Never." From 3 rows back, Thomas Grant's voice joined the chorus. "My wife and I observed the entire interaction," the retired civil rights attorney said. "In my professional opinion, what we witnessed was textbook discriminatory treatment. The selective enforcement of policies that did not seem to apply to any other passengers raises serious concerns about your airline's practices." Elizabeth Grant nodded in agreement. "If your company values truly include dignity and respect for all passengers, then this incident represents a fundamental failure of those values." Jordan Nelson stood up next, his smartphone still in hand. "I have the entire interaction recorded, from the initial confiscation of headphones to the false accusation of theft to the threat of removal. I would be happy to provide the video to Ms. Reynolds, to Global Journey's management, or to my 500,000 social media followers, whichever would be most helpful in addressing this situation properly." The implication was clear. This incident could become a public relations nightmare if not handled correctly. Sophia Ramirez stepped forward from the galley, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. "Mr. Blackwell, I feel obligated to speak up as well. This is not an isolated incident. I have observed similar treatment of passengers of color on multiple occasions. When I have raised concerns to management, they have been dismissed or ignored." Her words hung in the air, heavy with significance. This was not just about one flight attendant and one passenger anymore. It was about a pattern, a culture, a system that allowed such incidents to occur repeatedly without correction. Nicole Rodriguez, the first-class concierge, joined the growing chorus of witnesses. "I can confirm that Ms. Reynolds was identified at the gate as a VIP passenger traveling to deliver a keynote address. This information was communicated to the cabin crew during our pre-flight briefing." All eyes turned to Heather, whose face flushed red at this revelation. She had been explicitly informed about Jasmine's status and had chosen to ignore it. Richard Blackwell absorbed all this information, his expression grave. "I appreciate everyone speaking up. This kind of feedback, while difficult to hear, is essential for us to address these issues properly." He turned to his assistant. "Mr. Foster, please take down contact information from any passengers willing to provide formal statements about what they observed today." Foster nodded, already typing notes into his tablet. Blackwell then addressed the cabin at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Global Journey Airlines, I sincerely apologize for the disruption to your journey and for the inappropriate behavior you have witnessed. I want to assure you that this matter will be addressed thoroughly and transparently." Then he turned to Jasmine, his expression softening slightly. "Ms. Reynolds, I cannot adequately express my regret for what you have experienced today. No passenger should ever be treated with less than complete respect and dignity on our aircraft, regardless of age, race, or any other factor. It was a public acknowledgement of what had really happened, not a misunderstanding or a miscommunication, but a young black woman being treated differently because of who she was and how she looked." Jasmine nodded her acceptance of the apology, still maintaining her remarkable composure. "Thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate the passengers who spoke up. Not everyone would have done so, and would." Her words carried no bitterness, just a simple recognition of reality. Many people would have looked away, pretended not to notice, prioritized their own comfort over standing up for someone else. William Peterson cleared his throat, looking slightly embarrassed. "I should have said something sooner," he admitted. "When I saw the initial interaction, I knew something was not right, but I hesitated. I am sorry for that." "You spoke up when it mattered," Jasmine assured him. "That is what counts." The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. What had begun as an ugly display of prejudice had evolved into something unexpected, a community of strangers united in defense of fairness and dignity. People who might never have spoken to each other were now exchanging nods of solidarity, bound together by their shared witness to injustice and their collective refusal to remain silent. Blackwell turned to the Global Journey managers who had accompanied him on board. "Please arrange for an alternate crew member to handle first-class service for this flight. Ms. Wilson, I need you to deplane with us immediately." Heather's face went from flushed to ashen. "But the flight will proceed without you," Blackwell finished firmly. "We will discuss this matter further on the ground." The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Heather's 22 years of seniority, her spotless official record, her carefully cultivated authority, none of it would shield her from the consequences of actions that had been witnessed by a cabin full of passengers and captured on multiple devices. As she collected her personal items from the galley, avoiding eye contact with everyone, the reality of her situation appeared to finally dawn on her. This was not going to be smoothed over with an insincere apology or explained away as a misunderstanding. This was a reckoning that had been long overdue. Sophia caught Jasmine's eye and gave her a small, warm smile, an acknowledgement of the young woman's courage and a silent promise that things would be better from here on out. The passengers settled back into their seats, conversations resuming in hushed tones as they processed what they had witnessed. The ordinary routine of the flight would soon continue, but something fundamental had changed. A boundary had been drawn, A standard established, a message sent. This is not acceptable. Not here. Not anywhere. And it had all happened because one 17-year-old girl had refused to be diminished. 20 minutes before Anthony Reynolds arrived in the first-class cabin of Flight 437, a critical conversation was taking place in the relative privacy of the jet bridge. Richard Blackwell had escorted Heather Wilson off the aircraft, followed by Officer Taylor and 2 airline managers. The small group stood in the narrow space between the aircraft door and the terminal entrance, the constant hum of the ventilation system providing both background noise and a buffer against eavesdropping. Ms. Wilson Blackwell began, his voice calm but authoritative. "I want to understand exactly what happened from your perspective before we proceed further." Heather straightened her uniform jacket, a nervous habit she had developed over years of performance reviews and passenger complaints. "As I tried to explain earlier, I was following standard procedures for inventory control and passenger management." "Please be specific," Blackwell prompted. "Walk me through your actions and the reasoning behind them." Heather described noticing the headphones on Jasmine's console, her decision to confiscate them based on policy, the subsequent report of missing headphones from Mr. Peterson, and her conclusion that Jasmine must have been responsible. "And where in our operations manual does it state that headphones should be confiscated if a passenger has them before takeoff?" Blackwell asked. Heather hesitated. "It is not specifically written, but it is understood that premium items should be controlled to prevent theft or loss. Yet you did not confiscate headphones from other passengers who had them out before takeoff," Blackwell noted. "Can you explain why Ms. Reynolds was singled out for this policy enforcement?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable without admitting bias. Heather shifted tactics. "Sir, with all due respect, first-class passengers expect a certain environment. When someone does not fit the profile, it can make others uncomfortable." Blackwell's expression hardened. "And what profile would that be, Ms. Wilson?" Before she could respond, Olivia Bennett, Anthony Reynolds' executive assistant, appeared at the terminal entrance of the jet bridge, tablet in hand. She approached the group with purposeful strides. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, "Mr. Reynolds will be arriving in approximately 10 minutes. He has requested a full briefing on the situation and the airline's immediate response." Blackwell nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. Please inform Mr. Reynolds that we have removed Ms. Wilson from the flight and are conducting a preliminary investigation." Heather's eyes widened. "Anthony Reynolds is coming here. Personally." The implications were starting to dawn on her. This was not a routine customer service issue that would be handled through normal channels. This had escalated to the executive level with remarkable speed. Olivia turned to Heather, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes cold. "Ms. Wilson, I believe you should know that Jasmine Reynolds is not just any passenger. She is a recognized authority on algorithmic bias detection, invited to deliver the keynote address at the Future Innovators Summit. Her work has been implemented by major financial institutions, healthcare systems, and technology companies worldwide." The information landed like a physical blow. Heather had assumed Jasmine was at best an affluent teenager using her parents' money for a luxury trip, at worst, someone who did not belong in first class at all. The reality, that she was a respected expert traveling for a professional engagement, shattered those assumptions completely. "I was not aware," Heather managed. "That is precisely the problem," Blackwell interjected. "You made assumptions about Ms. Reynolds based on her age and appearance, then treated her accordingly without bothering to check the facts that were available to you." Officer Taylor, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Sir, from a security perspective, I want to be clear that at no point did Ms. Reynolds pose any threat or violate any regulations. This was entirely a customer service issue that was mischaracterized as a security concern. This assessment, from the very security officer Heather had summoned to support her actions, was damning. She had attempted to use security protocols as a weapon to intimidate a passenger who had done nothing wrong. One of the airline managers, a woman named Janet Lee from the Customer Experience Department, stepped forward with her tablet. "Mr. Blackwell, I have pulled Ms. Wilson's service record. While her technical evaluations are generally positive, there is a concerning pattern in passenger complaints." She turned the screen so Blackwell could see the data. Over the past 5 years, Ms. Wilson has received 46 formal complaints, significantly higher than the average of 12 for flight attendants with similar seniority en routes. Of those 46 complaints, 39 were filed by passengers of color passengers with non-American accents, or passengers who appeared to be Muslim. The pattern was unmistakable. Heather's treatment of Jasmine had not been an isolated incident or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was part of a consistent pattern of discriminatory behavior that had somehow gone uncorrected for years. Blackwell turned to the other manager, Michael Torres from Human Resources. "How were these complaints handled?" Torres looked uncomfortable. Most were routed through her direct supervisor, Luis Hernandez. In nearly all cases, they were dismissed as passenger misunderstanding or resolved through counseling. No formal disciplinary action was ever taken. The failure was becoming clear. It was not just Heather's individual bias at issue, but an entire chain of management that had enabled and protected that bias, allowing it to continue unchecked. The jet bridge door opened again, and Anthony Reynolds entered, his expression controlled, but his eyes scanning the group with keen assessment. Everyone straightened instinctively, not just because of his corporate position, but because he carried himself with natural authority. Mr. Reynolds Blackwell stepped forward, extending his hand. "Richard Blackwell, Senior VP of Customer Experience. Thank you for coming." Anthony shook his hand firmly. "I understand my daughter was subjected to discriminatory treatment on your aircraft." "Yes, sir. We are deeply sorry for the incident and are taking immediate action. Ms. Wilson has been removed from the flight and we are conducting a thorough investigation." Anthony nodded, then turned his attention to Heather, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Ms. Wilson, I presume?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I would like to understand what happened from your perspective," Anthony said, his tone neutral but penetrating. "Why did you single out my daughter for different treatment than other passengers?" It was the same question Blackwell had asked, but coming from Anthony, a father seeking to understand why his child had been humiliated. It carried different weight. Heather struggled to find words that would not incriminate her further. "Sir, I made an error in judgment. I misinterpreted the situation." "What specifically did you misinterpret?" Anthony pressed. Heather had no good answer. Any explanation would reveal the biased assumptions underlying her actions. Assumptions about who belonged in first class, who looked suspicious, who deserved respect, and who did not. Anthony studied her for a moment, then turned back to Blackwell. "I do not need to hear more. The facts are clear enough. What matters now is how Global Journey responds, not just to this specific incident, but to the underlying issues it represents." Blackwell nodded soberly. "We take this extremely seriously, Mr. Reynolds. Beyond the immediate personnel actions, we are launching a comprehensive review of our training, complaint handling, and accountability systems." "Words are easy," Anthony noted. "Horizon Holdings will be watching for concrete actions. Our corporate travel contract comes up for renewal in 3 months. How Global Journey addresses this situation will significantly influence our decision." The implications were clear. Millions of dollars in corporate contracts hung in the balance. Blackwell understood completely. "We welcome the scrutiny," he said. "This incident, while deeply regrettable, provides an opportunity for meaningful improvement. We would value your daughter's insights given her expertise in bias detection systems." Anthony's expression softened slightly. "That would be Jasmine's decision to make. She is her own person with her own professional standing. I am here as her father, not her business manager." He checked his watch. "I would like to see my daughter now, if you will excuse me." As Anthony moved toward the aircraft door, Heather stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds, I want to apologize. He stopped her with a raised hand. Ms. Wilson, I am not interested in apologies motivated by fear of consequences rather than genuine remorse. The time for that was before you decided to humiliate my daughter in front of a plane load of passengers. The words were delivered without heat but landed with devastating precision. Heather stepped back, face pale. Anthony continued toward the aircraft, leaving the airline executives to deal with the aftermath of his brief but powerful presence. As the jet bridge door closed behind him, Blackwell turned to his team. I want Luis Hernandez in my office within the hour. Pull every complaint filed against Ms. Wilson and trace how each was handled. Janet, prepare a full demographic analysis of complaint patterns across our entire flight attendant corps. Michael, I want a complete review of our training protocols, particularly regarding bias awareness and appropriate customer interaction. He turned to Heather last. Ms. Wilson, you are suspended effective immediately pending a formal investigation. Please surrender your ID badge and any company equipment to Human Resources before leaving the terminal. The corporate machinery was now in full motion, not because one flight attendant had treated one passenger poorly, but because that passenger happened to be the daughter of a powerful executive who could impact the airline's bottom line. It was an uncomfortable truth that justice often moved faster when financial interests aligned with moral imperatives. As the group dispersed, Olivia Bennett lingered briefly beside Blackwell. Sir, just so you are aware, Jordan Nelson from Tech Insights magazine was on that flight. He recorded the entire incident. Blackwell closed his eyes, momentarily absorbing this new complication. How long before it hit social media do you estimate Olivia checked her tablet? It is already trending. The conference room on the administrative level of Terminal 5 felt cavernous with just 3 people seated at the long table. Heather Wilson sat rigidly on one side, her union representative Gerald Cooper beside her. Across the table, Diane Mercer from Human Resources maintained a neutral expression as she reviewed documents on her tablet. Ms. Wilson, do you understand why you have been called to this meeting? Diane asked, looking up from her screen. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding a passenger interaction, Heather replied stiffly. Gerald Cooper, a veteran flight attendant who now represented the airline's union members in disciplinary proceedings, winced slightly at her response. Heather, I think we need to acknowledge the severity of the situation. The misunderstanding, as you call it, was recorded from multiple angles, Diane said, turning her tablet to show Heather the video compilation that had been assembled. It has already been viewed over 200,000 times on various social media platforms. Heather's face paled as she watched herself on screen. Confiscating Jasmine's headphones, later accusing her of theft, threatening to have her removed from the flight. Seen from the outside with no filter of self-justification, her actions appeared exactly as they were targeted, harassment based on prejudice. This does not show the full context, she protested weakly. What context would justify accusing a passenger of theft with no evidence, Diane asked. What context would explain why you enforced a non-existent policy with one passenger but not others? Gerald placed a cautioning hand on Heather's arm. Perhaps we should discuss the options moving forward. Diane nodded. Global Journey Airlines has 3 primary concerns addressing the immediate situation, appropriately preventing similar incidents in the future, and managing the significant reputational damage that is already occurring. She slid a document across the table. These are your options. Option 1 is immediate termination for cause with standard severance according to your contract. Option 2 is resignation with an enhanced severance package contingent upon signing a non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement clause. Heather stared at the document in disbelief. After 22 years of service, it had come to this, being forced out because of one passenger interaction. This is excessive, she argued. I have been a loyal employee for over 2 decades. My record has been exemplary. Diane's expression remained impassive as she slid another document across the table. This is a summary of passenger complaints filed against you over the past 5 years. 46 in total, more than 3 times the average for flight attendants with comparable seniority. She continued, "What is particularly concerning is the pattern these complaints reveal. 85% were filed by passengers of color, passengers with non-American accents, or passengers from other visibly marginalized groups." Heather's protest died on her lips. She had not realized there had been so many complaints. Each incident viewed in isolation had seemed justified to her. Passengers who were not following rules, who were being difficult, who needed to be reminded of proper behavior. She had not recognized the pattern that was obvious to anyone viewing the data objectively. This was not just one incident, Diane concluded. It was the one that was caught on video and went viral. Gerald reviewed the options carefully. "I recommend option 2, he told Heather quietly. "The enhanced severance would provide financial stability while you transition to a new career, and the company is not seeking punitive damages for the reputational harm." "Punitive damages," Heather repeated, stunned. "They cannot possibly blame me for—" "They absolutely can." Gerald interrupted. "The company is facing potential boycotts, the loss of corporate contracts, and a social media firestorm. The fact that they are offering option 2 at all is generous under the circumstances." While this conversation was taking place, Luis Hernandez was having a similar but more intensive meeting with Richard Blackwell and the airline's legal counsel. As Heather's direct supervisor for 8 years, his handling of the numerous complaints against her was under scrutiny. "Mr. Hernandez, did you recognize the pattern of discriminatory behavior in Ms. Wilson's passenger interactions?" the lawyer asked. Luis shifted uncomfortably. "I would not characterize it that way. Heather was, an excellent employee in many respects. Passengers complain for all sorts of reasons." "Yes, they do," Blackwell agreed. "But when complaints against one employee show a clear demographic pattern that should have triggered additional scrutiny, why did not it?" The question hung in the air. Luis had no good answer. He had dismissed or downplayed complaints against Heather for years, attributing them to demanding passengers or cultural misunderstandings rather than recognizing the consistent pattern they revealed. "I suppose I did not want to see it," he finally admitted. Meanwhile, in the executive suite, CEO James Whitman was on a video call with the board of directors explaining the situation and the company's response. "The incident itself is troubling enough," he told the grim-faced executives on his screen. "But the fact that it represents a pattern of behavior that went uncorrected for years indicates a more fundamental failure in our systems." "What is the potential financial impact?" asked. The CFO always focused on the bottom line. "Horizon Holdings' corporate contract alone is worth approximately $15 million annually," Whitman replied. "They are our 3rd largest corporate client, and their contract is up for renewal in 3 months. Beyond that, we are already seeing cancellations from other corporate clients who do not want to be associated with what is being characterized as institutional discrimination." And the social media situation, asked another board member. "Not good," Whitman admitted. The hashtag #GroundedByBias is trending. Several celebrities have shared the video and called for boycotts. Our customer service lines are overwhelmed with calls. The board members exchanged troubled glances. This was not just a PR problem. It was potentially an existential threat to the company's reputation and financial health. Back in the conference room, Heather had finally grasped the gravity of her situation. With trembling hands, she signed the resignation agreement accepting the enhanced severance package in exchange for quietly leaving the company and refraining from public comments about the incident. "What happens now?" she asked Gerald as she set down the pen. "You will be escorted to collect your personal belongings, then out of the building," he explained gently. "Your company credentials and access have already been deactivated." And then Gerald had no answer for that. The future Heather had envisioned, Retirement with a pension after 30 years of service, perhaps a position training new flight attendants, had vanished. At 45, she would be starting over, carrying the invisible but heavy weight of having become a public example of workplace discrimination. As she was escorted through the terminal by security, Heather kept her head down, aware of the curious glances from colleagues and passengers who might have recognized her from the viral video. Her uniform, once a source of pride and authority, now felt like a mark of shame. In the Human Resources Department, staff members were already reviewing personnel files, identifying other employees with similar complaint patterns. The investigation was expanding beyond Heather Wilson to include managers who had failed to address problematic behavior training protocols that had not adequately addressed bias and complaint procedures that had allowed serious issues to be dismissed without proper review. What had begun as one flight attendant's biased treatment of one passenger had exposed failures throughout the organization, failures of oversight, of accountability, of culture. Luis Hernandez left his meeting with a 2-week suspension and a final warning. Unlike Heather, he would have an opportunity to keep his job, though, under probationary conditions and with mandatory retraining. The disparity was not lost on him. He was being given a second chance that Heather had not received, largely because his role had been one of neglect rather than direct discrimination. By evening, Global Journey Airlines had issued a public statement acknowledging the incident, apologizing unreservedly, and outlining initial steps to address both the specific situation and the broader issues it revealed. The statement avoided corporate jargon in favor of straightforward language. Today, a global journey. Airline's flight attendant discriminated against a young passenger based on biased assumptions about who belongs in first class. We removed the employee from duty immediately and have accepted her resignation. We apologize unreservedly to Ms. Reynolds and to all our passengers who witnessed this unacceptable behavior. This incident has revealed failures in our training oversight and complaint handling systems that we are committed to addressing comprehensively and transparently. We recognize that acknowledging the problem is only the first step. Our actions moving forward will demonstrate the sincerity of our commitment to ensuring every passenger is treated with dignity and respect. The statement was notable for what it did not do. It did not minimize the incident, as an isolated occurrence did not hide behind corporate euphemisms, and did not attempt to shift blame away from the company itself. For Heather Wilson, whose name was not mentioned in the statement, but whose face was already recognizable across social media, the consequences were just beginning. As she drove home that evening, her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Messages from colleagues, alerts from news sites covering the story, emails from friends asking what had happened. She silenced the phone and drove in stunned silence, still struggling to reconcile her self-image as a professional doing her job with the person she had seen in those videos. Someone whose actions could only be described as discriminatory. Someone whose behavior had been so clearly inappropriate that it had cost her a 22-year career in a matter of hours. The reality was still sinking in. Her career was over. Her reputation destroyed, her future uncertain. And it had all happened because she had made assumptions about a 17-year-old girl based on how she looked, assumptions that had been not just wrong, but spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. As Global Journey Airlines executives managed the crisis from corporate headquarters, the more immediate challenge of Flight 437 still needed to be addressed. 247 passengers had witnessed the confrontation in first class, had seen Heather Wilson escorted off the plane, and were now waiting to learn whether their flight to London would proceed as scheduled or be further delayed. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Sullivan was on the radio with Operations Control receiving updates and instructions. After concluding the call, he turned to First Officer Jennifer Ramirez. "They are sending a replacement flight attendant for first class, Rachel Brooks from the standby crew. ETA 5 minutes. Jennifer nodded, making a note on her flight plan. "What about the passengers? They have been sitting there for almost an hour now. I am going to make an announcement," Michael decided. "They deserve to know what is happening." He switched to the cabin address system, his voice calm and authoritative as it filled the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sullivan speaking. I want to apologize for the delay in our departure. As many of you witnessed, we had a situation involving a member of our cabin crew that required immediate attention. In the first-class cabin, all conversations ceased as passengers listened intently. That situation has been resolved," Michael continued. "The crew member in question is no longer on the aircraft and will not be returning. We are waiting for a replacement flight attendant to arrive, which should take approximately 5 more minutes, after which we will be cleared for an immediate departure. Our estimated arrival in London remains on schedule as we can make up the time en route." He paused, then added something that was not in the standard announcement script. "On behalf of Global Journey Airlines, I want to personally apologize for the unprofessional behavior that occurred on my aircraft today. That behavior does not reflect our values or expectations, and I am committed to ensuring that the remainder of your journey is comfortable and respectful. Thank you for your patience and understanding." The announcement was met with murmurs of approval throughout the cabin. Captain Sullivan had done something rare in corporate culture. He had acknowledged the problem directly without euphemisms or excuses, taken personal responsibility as the aircraft commander, and made a clear commitment to improvement. 5 minutes later, Rachel Brooks boarded the aircraft, her uniform crisp and her manner professionally warm as she made her way to the first-class galley. The cabin crew briefed her quickly on the situation, and she immediately approached Jasmine's seat. "Ms. Reynolds, I am Rachel Brooks. I will be taking over first-class service for this flight," she said, her tone respectful without being obsequious. "Is there anything I can get for you before we prepare for departure?" "No, thank you," Jasmine replied. "I appreciate your asking." Rachel nodded and continued through the cabin, greeting each passenger individually and checking if they needed anything. Her approach was a masterclass in professional service, attentive without hovering, respectful without fawning, treating each passenger as an individual rather than a seat number. The contrast with Heather Wilson's behavior was striking. Where Heather had created hierarchies and applied different standards to different passengers, Rachel treated everyone with the same level of professional courtesy. Where Heather had approached her role as a gatekeeper protecting first class from those she deemed unworthy, Rachel approached hers as a service professional, ensuring every passenger's comfort. As the cabin crew prepared for departure, Sophia Ramirez, who had witnessed the entire confrontation earlier, approached Jasmine with a small gesture of reconciliation, the noise-canceling headphones still in their original packaging. "Ms. Reynolds, I believe these belong at your seat," she said simply, placing them on the console. "Thank you," Jasmine replied with a small smile of acknowledgement. It was a subtle but significant moment. A symbolic restoration of what had been wrongfully taken, an acknowledgement of Jasmine's rightful place in first class. Throughout the cabin, the atmosphere had transformed. The initial tension had given way to a sense of resolution, even camaraderie. Passengers who might normally have traveled in isolated bubbles of privacy were engaged in quiet conversations about what they had witnessed, sharing perspectives and reactions. William Peterson leaned across the aisle toward Jasmine. "Is this your first time in London?" "Yes," she replied. "I have been to conferences in San Francisco and Berlin, but never London. The weather is supposed to be decent for November," he offered. "If you have any free time around your keynote, the British Museum is worth a visit. Their computing history exhibit is particularly good." In row 3, Thomas and Elizabeth Grant were having a whispered conversation. "Reminds me of that lunch counter in Greensboro," Thomas said. "Different time, different place, same underlying issue." Elizabeth nodded. "But a better outcome, at least. No one had to get arrested to make the point this time." Jordan Nelson had put away his phone, the recording safely uploaded to cloud storage. He was jotting notes in a small notebook, already framing the story he would write. Not a sensationalized account of discrimination, but a more nuanced examination of how systems either perpetuate or correct bias. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway, Captain Sullivan's voice came over the intercom again. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff." The simple routine phrase signaled a return to normalcy. The incident was behind them, the journey was proceeding. Yet for everyone on board, something had fundamentally changed. They had witnessed a moment of injustice, then a moment of accountability, and finally a moment of reset, when standards were reestablished and proper order restored. For Jasmine Reynolds, the experience had been both humiliating and validating. She had been targeted, accused, and threatened. But she had also been defended, supported, and ultimately vindicated. Her dignity had been challenged but never surrendered. Her rights had been questioned but ultimately recognized. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, she looked out the window at the lights of New York receding into the distance. Behind her lay the confrontation, her father's intervention, the corporate response. Ahead lay London, her keynote address, her future. The plane lifted off smoothly, banking gently to the east as it climbed toward cruising altitude. Jasmine felt a sense of parallel ascent, the physical journey matched by a more personal one. She had boarded this flight as a 17-year-old tech prodigy on her way to deliver a speech. She would land as someone who had experienced firsthand the issues her work addressed, the human biases that infected systems, the assumptions that shaped interactions, the patterns that went unchallenged until someone finally said, "This is not acceptable." Rachel moved through the cabin once they reached cruising altitude, offering drinks and setting up the dinner service. When she reached Jasmine's seat, she provided the same attentive service she offered every passenger. No special treatment, no different standards, just professional courtesy offered equally to all. That equality of treatment, that simple professional respect, was precisely what had been missing earlier. It was what Jasmine had requested, what her father had demanded, what the airline executives had ultimately enforced. Not preferential treatment, not special accommodation, just the basic dignity of being treated like everyone else. As the meal service concluded and the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight flight, Jasmine opened her laptop to review her keynote once more. The speech she had prepared was technically sound, academically rigorous, and practically applicable. But now, after today's experience, it felt incomplete. It addressed the what and the how of algorithmic bias, but did not fully capture the why. The human impact, the real-world consequences, the lived experience of being categorized and treated differently based on how you look. She began to revise, adding a new introduction that connected the technical aspects of her work to the human realities it addressed. Without explicitly mentioning today's incident, she wove in the insights it had provided. How bias operates not just in digital systems, but in human ones. How it shapes interactions and decisions in ways often invisible to those who benefit from it. How challenging it requires both technical solutions and human courage. Around her, the first-class cabin had settled into the rhythm of a transatlantic night flight. Some passengers watched movies on their screens. Others worked on laptops, several had reclined their seats to sleep. The confrontation that had dominated the space hours earlier now seemed distant, already transforming from immediate experience to memory, from raw emotion to reflected understanding. Jasmine saved her revised keynote and closed her laptop. Tomorrow she would deliver a speech about bias detection and correction systems to an audience of tech industry leaders. Tonight she had lived through a case study in how those systems function, or fail to function, in the real world. As she reclined her seat and prepared to sleep, Jasmine reflected on something her father often said. The most powerful lessons are not taught, they are experienced. Today had certainly been an experience, one that had tested her composure, challenged her dignity, and ultimately affirmed her resolve. She closed her eyes as Flight 437 continued eastward through the night, carrying 247 passengers who had witnessed something significant together. A moment when bias was confronted, accountability was enforced, and a system reset itself to align more closely with its stated values. It was not perfect justice, and it would not prevent similar incidents elsewhere, but it was a step in the right direction. and sometimes one step was enough to start a journey. While Flight 437 crossed the Atlantic, the video of Jasmine's confrontation with Heather Wilson was crossing the internet at light speed. Jordan Nelson's original upload had been shared by a tech influencer with millions of followers, then picked up by mainstream news outlets looking for trending content. By the time the sun rose over New York, the hashtag #GroundedByBias had generated over 500,000 tweets. Conversations about race privilege, corporate accountability, and the everyday experiences of discrimination faced by people of color had taken over social media platforms. In Brooklyn, 17-year-old Aaliyah Jackson watched the video during breakfast, recognizing something painfully familiar in Jasmine's experience. "Mom, this is exactly what happened to us at that restaurant last month," she said, turning her phone so her mother could see, "except nobody stood up for us and no executives came to apologize." Aaliyah's mother nodded grimly. "The difference is her father has power. That is why they listened. But maybe this will make people listen more for everyone," Aaliyah suggested hopefully. "Maybe this video will make people believe us when we tell them what happens." In the suburban Chicago home of William Peterson, a similar conversation was taking place. His 20-year-old daughter, home from college for the weekend, had recognized her father in some of the videos circulating online. "Dad, that was you on the plane. The one who stood up for that girl?" she asked over breakfast. William nodded, somewhat embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what anyone should have done." "But most people do not," his daughter pointed out. "They look away. They pretend not to notice." "You actually said something." Her words carried both pride and gentle accusation. How many times had he looked away in the past? How many incidents had he witnessed without speaking up? "I should have said something sooner," he admitted. "When the flight attendant first started treating her differently, I noticed it, but I did not want to get involved until it became impossible to ignore." It was a moment of honest self-reflection from a man who had always considered himself progressive, but was now recognizing the gap between believing in equality and actively defending it when it mattered. At Global Journey Airlines headquarters, the crisis management team had been working through the night. The company's initial statement had been well received for its directness, but the situation continued to evolve as more videos emerged, more witnesses shared their accounts, and the story gained international attention. CEO James Whitman convened an emergency executive meeting at 7:00 a.m., his face showing the strain of a sleepless night. "Our preliminary media analysis shows this incident has been covered by over 200 news outlets in 42 countries," reported the communications director. "It is the lead story on 3 major morning shows, and we have received interview requests from dozens of journalists." "What about passenger sentiment?" Whitman asked. "Bookings are down 12% compared to the same day last week," the revenue management director replied. "We are seeing a spike in cancellations, particularly from corporate clients concerned about association with the brand right now." And Horizon Holdings. Richard Blackwell, who had been at the center of the initial response, provided the update. "Anthony Reynolds has agreed to a meeting next week to discuss our comprehensive response plan. He has made it clear that continuing their corporate contract will depend on demonstrable changes, not just promises." Whitman nodded, understanding the stakes. "Then we need to ensure our response is substantive, not just symbolic. What are our immediate action items?" For the next hour, the executive team outlined a multifaceted approach, a company-wide audit of complaint patterns, mandatory bias, awareness, training for all customer-facing staff, revision of hiring and promotion practices, creation of an independent review board for discrimination complaints, and establishment of clear metrics to measure improvement over time. "This is not just about public relations," Whitman emphasized. "This is about ensuring our company lives up to its stated values." The incident with Ms. Reynolds exposed a gap between who we claim to be and how we actually operate. Our job now is to close that gap. Across the country in Seattle, tech industry leaders were discussing the implications of the viral video for their own companies. At a major social media platform, the diversity and inclusion team was using the incident as a case study in their weekly meeting. "What strikes me about this situation," said the team leader, "is how it parallels the exact issues Jasmine Reynolds addresses in her work on algorithmic bias. Human systems and digital systems suffer from the same fundamental problems: unchecked assumptions, pattern-based decision-making that disadvantages certain groups, and lack of oversight mechanisms. The difference is added another team member AI systems can be audited and corrected once bias is identified. Human systems are messier. Are they, though, challenged a third colleague? Global Journey. Airlines could implement the same kind of bias detection and correction systems for their human operations that tech companies are building for AI. They could track patterns in complaints, monitor demographic disparities in passenger treatment, identify problem areas, and implement corrections. The idea was compelling, applying the principles of algorithmic bias detection to human organizational behavior. It represented a potential bridge between Jasmine's technical work and its real-world applications beyond AI systems. Meanwhile, other airlines were watching Global Journey's crisis unfold with a mixture of sympathy and self-interest. At competing carriers, executives were quietly ordering reviews of their own complaint handling procedures, customer service training, and bias prevention protocols. This could have happened to any airline, admitted the customer experience VP at a major competitor during a closed-door meeting. "We need to make sure it does not happen to us next." The ripple effect extended beyond the aviation industry. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, and other service-oriented businesses began examining their own practices. The viral nature of the incident had created a moment of widespread institutional reflection, companies asking themselves not just, "How would we have handled this specific situation?" but the more fundamental question, "Are we vulnerable to the same failures?" As Flight 437 crossed into European airspace, none of the passengers on board, not even Jasmine herself, were aware of how far their story had already traveled or how many conversations it had sparked. What had begun as one flight attendant's biased treatment of one passenger had expanded into a global conversation about discrimination, accountability, and the gap between proclaimed values and actual practices. The incident had become something larger than itself, a case study, a catalyst, a mirror in which individuals and institutions could examine their own behaviors and biases. And somewhere over the Atlantic, as dawn broke over the horizon, Jasmine Reynolds slept peacefully in seat 1A, unaware that her experience was already changing the world she would soon be addressing in her keynote speech. The arrival hall at Heathrow Terminal 5 hummed with the controlled chaos typical of major international airports. Passengers streaming through customs, reuniting with loved ones, or hurrying toward ground transportation. Amid this flow of humanity, Jasmine Reynolds emerged from the secure area, pulling her carry-on suitcase and adjusting her backpack. She had expected to navigate her way to the hotel alone, armed with the conference organizer's instructions and her own resourcefulness. Instead, she found a driver in a dark suit holding a tablet displaying her name. Beside him stood Amara Jackson, Global Journey's London Customer Relations Manager, who had escorted Jasmine through expedited customs. "Ms. Reynolds, Amara said the car is ready whenever you are. We have arranged direct transportation to your hotel." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, slightly overwhelmed by the attention. "This is not necessary, but I appreciate it." "It is the least we can do," Amara assured her. "Mr. Whitman is very concerned that the remainder of your London experience be as smooth and pleasant as possible." As they walked toward the exit, Jasmine noticed a small cluster of reporters with cameras and microphones near the arrivals gate. One of them spotted her and nudged the other's cameras swiveling in her direction. "Ms. Reynolds." "Can we get a statement about yesterday's incident?" called out a journalist moving toward them. Amara smoothly guided Jasmine toward a side exit. "We can avoid the media if you prefer. There has been quite a bit of coverage overnight." "How did they even know I was on this flight?" Jasmine asked, surprised by the press presence. "The video has gone viral," Amara explained. Global Journey issued a statement which named you as the passenger involved. I am afraid the story has caught significant attention, particularly given your professional standing in the tech community. They reached the car, the driver holding the door, as Jasmine slid into the back seat. Amara joined her while the driver loaded her luggage into the trunk. I did not expect this level of interest, Jasmine said, watching through tinted windows as the journalists regrouped, looking around for their missed opportunity. The timing amplified the story Amara explained. With your keynote at the Future Innovators Summit today, there is a powerful narrative. A young expert on bias detection systems, experiencing bias firsthand en route to speak about that very topic. The car pulled away from the terminal, merging into the morning traffic heading toward central London. Jasmine checked her phone for the first time since landing and found it overwhelmed with notifications. Texts from friends who had seen the video, emails from journalists requesting interviews, social media mentions by the thousands. This is a lot, she said quietly. It is entirely up to you how you want to handle it, Amara assured her. Global Journey will support whatever approach you choose, whether that is declining all media requests, issuing a brief statement, or participating in selected interviews. Jasmine considered her options. She had not sought this spotlight, had not wanted her personal experience to become a public narrative. Yet there was an opportunity here, a chance to connect her theoretical work on bias detection to a vivid real-world example that people were already engaged with. I think I need some time to decide, she said finally. My priority right now is preparing for my keynote this afternoon. Of course, Amara nodded. The hotel has been briefed to provide additional privacy and security. No calls will be put through to your room without your approval, and staff will ensure no media gain access to the property. As they drove through London's morning traffic, Jasmine gazed out at the iconic cityscape. The historic architecture juxtaposed with modern glass towers, the Thames flowing beneath centuries-old bridges, red double-decker buses navigating narrow streets. She had been looking forward to exploring this city, perhaps visiting the British Museum or taking a walk along the South Bank. Now she wondered if that would be possible with media attention following her. Have there been other incidents like mine on Global Journey flights? She asked suddenly, turning back to Amara. The question caught the airline representative off guard. I do not have specific statistics, she replied carefully. But your experience has prompted a comprehensive review of our complaint patterns and response procedures. That is good, Jasmine said, because I suspect what happened to me is not unique, just uniquely visible because it was recorded and because my father has influence. Amara nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with this direct acknowledgement of corporate reality. You are probably right, she admitted, which is why Mr. Whitman is taking this as an opportunity for genuine reform, not just crisis management. The car pulled up to the entrance of the Langham London, one of the city's most prestigious historic hotels. The doorman approached immediately, opening Jasmine's door and welcoming her by name. Ms. Reynolds, welcome to the Langham. We are honored to have you with us. The VIP treatment continued in the lobby, where the hotel manager personally greeted her and escorted her to the front desk for an expedited check-in. No mention was made of the viral video or the incident on the plane, but the heightened attention suggested everyone was well aware of who she was and why she warranted special handling. You have been upgraded to one of our signature suites, the manager explained as they rode the elevator. The conference organizers had originally booked a deluxe room, but we took the liberty of enhancing your accommodation. Again, Jasmine found herself in the awkward position of receiving preferential treatment because of an incident in which she had been discriminated against. The irony was not lost on her. The suite was spectacular, spacious and elegant, with a separate living area, a marble bathroom, and windows overlooking Regent Street. On the dining table sat a welcome basket containing fresh fruit chocolates and a handwritten note from the hotel manager, expressing his hope that her stay would be comfortable. Is there anything else you need? Amara asked as Jasmine took in the luxurious surroundings. "No, thank you. This is more than enough," Jasmine replied. "I appreciate all the arrangements, but what I really need now is some quiet time to prepare for my keynote." Amara nodded, handing Jasmine her business card. "Of course. I am available if you need anything at all during your stay. And Mr. Whitman is still very interested in speaking with you at your convenience, either today after your keynote or tomorrow before your return flight." After Amara left, Jasmine finally had a moment alone, her first real privacy since boarding Flight 437 yesterday. She sat on the edge of the plush bed taking deep breaths and trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She had come to London to deliver a keynote on bias detection systems. Now she found herself at the center of a case study in how bias operates in the real world, how it gets challenged, and how institutions respond when forced to confront it. Outside her window, London continued its bustling morning rhythm, unaware of the young woman who had arrived carrying both her original mission and an unexpected new platform from which to advance it. The grand ballroom of the London Convention Centre hummed with anticipation as attendees for the Future Innovators Summit filed in, finding seats and exchanging greetings with colleagues. The room was designed to impress. Soaring ceilings with crystal chandeliers, state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment, and seating for over 800 people arranged in a gentle arc facing the elevated stage. Behind the scenes in a small preparation room, Jasmine Reynolds sat alone reviewing her slides one final time. She had spent the morning reworking sections of her presentation, connecting her technical framework more explicitly to the human experiences it was designed to address. The airline incident had provided a perfect case study, not because she wanted to center her personal experience, but because it illustrated precisely the kinds of pattern-based discrimination her algorithm was designed to detect. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. 10 minutes, Ms. Reynolds called a staff member. "Thank you," she replied, closing her laptop. Jasmine stood and straightened her blazer, a deep blue one she had packed specifically for this occasion professional without being stuffy. She checked her appearance briefly in the mirror, adjusting her natural hair, which she had styled in a neat updo rather than the ponytail she had worn on the flight. At 17, preparing to address hundreds of industry leaders, Jasmine felt the weight of expectations, not just professional ones related to her technical expertise, but now also the unasked-for responsibility of representing something larger. Overnight, she had become not just a young tech prodigy, but a symbol of resistance to discrimination, a focal point for conversations about bias and belonging. Another knock, more insistent this time. 5 minutes, Ms. Reynolds. They are ready for you. Jasmine took a deep breath, centered herself, and headed for the stage. As she waited in the wings, she could hear the conference organizer making her introduction. Our next speaker represents the future of ethical AI development. At just 17, she has developed a framework for algorithmic bias detection that is already being implemented by major financial institutions, healthcare systems, and technology companies worldwide. Her FAIR protocol: Fairness in Algorithmic Information. Reasoning provides a systematic approach to identifying and correcting bias in machine learning models. Please welcome Jasmine Reynolds. Applause filled the ballroom as Jasmine walked onto the stage, her steps confident despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. The lights were bright, the audience a sea of attentive faces. She noticed with a start that the crowd was larger than expected. Standing room only at the back, with additional chairs having been brought in to accommodate the overflow. She reached the podium, connected her laptop to the presentation system, and waited for the applause to subside. Then, departing from her prepared opening, she began with a simple statement. Yesterday, on my flight to London, I experienced something that many of you have likely seen online by now, a clear example of human bias in action. A ripple of recognition moved through the audience. Many had indeed seen the video which explained the unexpected attendance surge. They had come not just for the technical content, but to see the young woman whose dignity in the face of discrimination had impressed millions. I did not plan to start with that story, Jasmine continued, but it provides a perfect entry point to the work I am here to discuss. Because bias is not just a technical problem in our algorithms. It is a human problem that manifests in our technologies, because humans create those technologies. She advanced to her first slide, which displayed a simple but powerful equation. Biased data plus unexamined assumptions equals biased outcomes. When we feed our AI systems data that reflects historical patterns of discrimination, those systems learn to perpetuate those patterns, she explained. When facial recognition systems fail to accurately identify darker-skinned faces, when hiring algorithms downgrade candidates with women's colleges on their resumes, when credit scoring models penalize applicants from certain zip codes, these are not technical glitches. They are reflections of societal biases encoded into our systems. The audience was completely engaged, many taking notes, others nodding in recognition of issues they had encountered in their own work. But here is the key insight that drives my research. Jasmine continued advancing to the next slide. The same patterns that allow us to detect bias in algorithms can help us identify bias in human systems. The same principles of fairness that we can encode into AI can be applied to human institutions and interactions. She moved into the technical portion of her presentation, explaining the FAIR protocol in detail, how it established baseline expectations of outcome parity across demographic groups, how it flagged statistically significant deviations that might indicate bias, how it traced those deviations back to specific decision points in the algorithm where corrections could be implemented. Throughout the explanation, she wove in references to human systems, how airlines could track patterns in passenger complaints by demographic characteristics, how corporations could monitor promotion rates across different employee groups, how service industries could audit customer satisfaction scores for disparities that might indicate biased treatment. The power of algorithmic bias detection, she explained, is that it forces us to define explicitly what fairness looks like. It requires us to state our assumptions, examine our data, and be accountable for outcomes. When a machine learning model produces biased results, we do not accept that is just how the algorithm works. We debug it, we fix it, we improve it. She paused, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. What if we approached human systems with the same rigor? What if we demanded the same transparency, the same accountability, the same commitment to debugging and improvement? The connection between her technical work and its broader implications was resonating powerfully. Industry leaders who might have dismissed concerns about bias as political rather than technical were engaged with the framework presented in terms they understood: systems data outcomes optimization. As Jasmine moved toward her conclusion, she addressed the elephant in the room directly, but briefly. Yesterday's incident on my flight to London was not just about one flight attendant and one passenger. It revealed patterns that likely existed long before I boarded that plane, patterns that went undetected or unaddressed because the right detection systems were not in place. The airline's response has been to implement precisely the kind of monitoring and correction mechanisms that my research advocates for algorithmic systems. That is, progress. She advanced to her final slide, which displayed a quote that had become the cornerstone of her work. An algorithm is only as good as the data it is trained on. A society is only as just as the values it enforces. The future of ethical AI is not just about better algorithms, Jasmine concluded. It is about better human systems that create, deploy, and govern those algorithms. It is about recognizing that bias detection is not a one-time fix, but an ongoing commitment to monitoring, learning, and improving. It is about creating feedback loops that make our systems, both digital and human, more fair, more transparent, and more accountable over time. She smiled, making eye contact with the audience one final time. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions. For a moment, The ballroom was completely silent. Then, as if a dam had broken, the applause erupted. Not the polite acknowledgement that typically follows technical presentations, but a standing ovation that rolled through the room in waves. Industry leaders who had been skeptical of a 17-year-old keynote speaker were on their feet recognizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A perfect integration of technical brilliance and moral clarity of abstract principles and lived experience. The Q&A session that followed was equally powerful. Questions ranged from technical details of the FAIR protocol's implementation to broader inquiries about how bias detection frameworks might be applied to various industries. One question in particular captured the essence of how Jasmine's presentation had shifted perspectives. A senior executive from a major tech company asked, "We have been treating bias as a PR problem, something to manage when it becomes visible. You are suggesting we treat it as a systems engineering problem, something to detect and correct even when no one is watching. How do we make that transition organizationally?" Jasmine's response was both practical and profound. Start by measuring what matters. Track outcomes across demographic groups. Look for patterns. When you find disparities, trace them back to their sources in your systems. Make the invisible visible. And perhaps most importantly, create accountability structures that treat bias as a bug to be fixed, not an embarrassment to be hidden. By the time the session concluded, it was clear that Jasmine's keynote had transcended the typical conference presentation. It had become a defining moment for many in attendance, a reframing of how they understood the relationship between technology and society, between algorithms and the humans who create them. As Jasmine gathered her materials and prepared to leave the stage, the conference organizer approached with wide eyes. "That was remarkable," she said. "We have already had requests from 3 other major conferences to have you keynote their events, and the online response has been overwhelming. #FAIR algorithms is trending alongside #grounded by bias." Jasmine nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had not sought this spotlight, had not planned to become the center of a viral moment that connected so directly to her professional work. But now that it had happened, she recognized the unique platform it provided to advance the principles she believed in. She had come to London to talk about algorithmic bias detection. She would leave having demonstrated its real-world applications in a way no purely technical presentation could have accomplished. As she walked off the stage to continued applause, Jasmine realized that sometimes the most powerful arguments are not made in abstractions but in lived experiences. Not in theories, but in moments of truth, when principles are tested and either abandoned or upheld. Yesterday on Flight 437, she had upheld her principles. Today, she had shown the world why those principles mattered beyond her personal dignity, why they were essential to creating both technological and human systems worthy of trust. 2 weeks after her return from London, Jasmine sat with her parents in the book-lined study of their Westchester County home. Across from them sat Miranda Chen, one of New York's most respected civil rights attorneys, who had been advising the family since shortly after the incident. "The settlement offer from Global Journey is unprecedented," Miranda explained, sliding a document across the polished oak table. $5 million in damages with no confidentiality clause or non-disparagement requirement. They are not trying to buy your silence. They are acknowledging liability and accepting public accountability. Anthony Reynolds studied the document, his expression thoughtful. "What is your assessment, Miranda? Is this fair compensation?" "More than fair," she replied without hesitation. Most discrimination settlements involving airlines range from $20,000 to $100,000 with strict confidentiality provisions. This offer is 50 times that amount and allows Jasmine to speak freely about her experience. It is extraordinary. Vanessa Reynolds, a pediatric surgeon whose calm pragmatism complemented her husband's strategic thinking, turned to her daughter. "Jasmine, this is ultimately your decision. You are the one who experienced this, and you should determine how it is resolved. Jasmine had been quiet during the discussion, processing the implications of such a substantial settlement. At 17, the idea of receiving $5 million for an incident that had lasted less than an hour seemed almost absurd, regardless of how humiliating it had been. "It does not feel right to profit from this personally," she said finally. "The money feels disconnected from what actually happened and what needs to change." Miranda nodded, respecting her perspective. "That is understandable. Some clients choose to donate settlement funds to relevant causes or establish foundations that address the underlying issues." Jasmine's expression brightened as an idea took shape. "What if we used the entire settlement to create an initiative focused on bias detection and correction in service industries? Something that would provide both tools and training to help companies identify and address discriminatory patterns before they lead to incidents like mine." Anthony and Vanessa exchanged proud glances. Their daughter was thinking beyond personal compensation to structural change. "That is a powerful concept," Anthony agreed. "We could structure it as an independent nonprofit with a specific mission to develop and implement bias detection frameworks across transportation, hospitality, retail, and other service sectors. And we could partner with existing organizations already doing related work," Vanessa added, "like the Equal Justice Initiative or the National Urban League." For the next hour, the family brainstormed possibilities, their excitement building as the concept took shape. By the end of the evening, the outline of the Equal Skies Initiative had emerged, a foundation that would use the entire settlement amount to fund research, develop training programs, and create practical tools for bias detection and correction. 3 days later, Jasmine found herself in another meeting, this time in the Midtown offices of Global Journey Airlines. CEO James Whitman had requested a personal conversation about the settlement and the airline's ongoing reforms. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted her, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I want to ensure you are satisfied with our proposed resolution and to update you on the changes we are implementing." Jasmine, accompanied by Miranda Chen, took a seat in the comfortable conference room. "Mr. Whitman, I have decided to accept the settlement offer, but with a specific intention. I will be using the entire amount to establish the Equal Skies Initiative, a nonprofit focused on developing bias detection and correction systems for service industries." Whitman looked genuinely impressed. "That is an extraordinary commitment. Most people in your position would view the settlement as personal compensation." "This was never about money for me," Jasmine replied. "It is about creating change that prevents others from experiencing what I did." She outlined the initiative's planned focus: research partnerships with universities, development of industry-specific bias detection frameworks, and creation of training programs that could be implemented across service sectors. "I would like to invite Global Journey to be our first corporate partner," she concluded. "Not just as a financial contributor, but as a test case and implementation model. The airline could help develop and refine these systems in a real-world environment, sharing both successes and challenges to benefit the broader industry." Whitman nodded thoughtfully. "That is a compelling proposition. It aligns with the direction we are already moving. We have established a dedicated team to develop more robust monitoring systems for customer interactions and complaint patterns." He hesitated briefly before continuing. "Ms. Reynolds, would you consider joining our newly formed Ethics Advisory Board? Your expertise in bias detection systems, combined with your personal experience as our passenger, would provide invaluable perspective." It was a delicate request, asking the very person who had been discriminated against to help fix the company's problems. But Jasmine had been considering this possibility since her keynote in London, recognizing that her work on algorithmic bias had direct applications to human organizational systems. "I would consider it," she replied carefully, "but only if the board has real authority, not just advisory capacity, but actual oversight power with concrete accountability mechanisms." "That is precisely how we have structured it," Whitman assured her. "The board will have independent authority to investigate complaints, review policies, and mandate changes when necessary. Its recommendations will be binding, not optional. Miranda Chen, who had been quietly observing, interjected with a lawyer's precision. We would need to see the board's charter authority parameters and reporting structure before Jasmine makes any commitment. Of course, Whitman agreed. We will provide all relevant documentation for your review. The meeting continued with discussions of specific reforms already underway at Global Journey, the comprehensive retraining program being developed for all customer-facing staff, the revised complaint tracking system designed to flag potential bias patterns, the new performance metrics that emphasized equitable treatment rather than merely efficient service. By the time the meeting concluded, a framework for potential collaboration had emerged. Jasmine would consider joining the Ethics Advisory Board, pending review of its structure and authority. Global Journey would become a founding corporate partner of the Equal Skies Initiative, providing not just financial support, but access to data systems and implementation environments for testing bias detection frameworks. 6 weeks later, the Equal Skies Initiative was formally launched at a press conference held at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Jasmine, still a month shy of her 18th birthday, stood at the podium, addressing a room filled with journalists, industry representatives, civil rights advocates, and tech innovators. The Equal Skies Initiative begins with a single premise. She explained her composure and articulation belying her youth. Bias can be detected and corrected systematically, whether in algorithmic systems or human organizations. We do not have to accept discrimination as inevitable or address it only after the damage is done. She outlined the initiative's 3 core programs. Research and development focused on creating industry-specific bias detection frameworks. Training and implementation designed to help organizations adopt these frameworks effectively. And accountability and certification, which would provide independent verification of companies' bias prevention efforts. We are starting with the transportation sector, Jasmine announced, with initial partnerships across airlines, railways, and rideshare companies. But our vision extends to all service industries where bias can affect customer experiences and outcomes. The announcement generated significant media coverage with particular attention to Jasmine's decision to direct the entire settlement towards structural change rather than personal benefit. Headlines ranged from teen tech Prodigy turns discrimination settlement into force for change to from passenger to pioneer. How one incident sparked an industry revolution. Within days, the initiative had received inquiries from dozens of companies across various service sectors, retail chains, hotel groups, financial institutions, healthcare systems, all interested in implementing more robust bias detection and correction mechanisms. Global Journey Airlines, as the founding corporate partner, took a leading role in piloting the initiative's first comprehensive framework. The airline established a dedicated data team to track customer interactions and outcomes across demographic groups, identifying potential disparities that might indicate bias. When patterns emerged, they were traced back to their sources, specific policies, training gaps, or individual behaviors, where targeted interventions could be implemented. The results were promising. Within 6 months, passenger complaints related to discriminatory treatment had decreased by 62%. More significantly, the demographic distribution of those complaints had shifted toward proportional representation across passenger groups, suggesting more equitable treatment rather than simply fewer reports. Other airlines began implementing similar systems, partly driven by competitive pressure, partly by genuine commitment to improvement, and partly by fear of becoming the next viral discrimination incident. The ripple effect continued to expand with transportation industry publications regularly featuring case studies, best practices, and implementation guides related to bias detection systems. For Jasmine Reynolds, the evolution from passenger to pioneer represented an unexpected but powerful convergence of her personal experience and professional expertise. The algorithm she had developed for detecting bias in AI systems was now being adapted for use in human organizations, creating feedback loops and correction mechanisms that made discrimination harder to perpetuate and easier to address. As she prepared to start college the following fall, having received full scholarships from multiple prestigious universities, Jasmine reflected on the strange journey that had begun with a flight attendant's biased treatment and led to an initiative that was already changing industry practices. The settlement money that had seemed so excessive for a single discriminatory incident was now properly scaled to its purpose, not as compensation for one person's humiliation, but as investment in preventing countless similar experiences across entire industries. The Equal Skies initiative had transformed what could have been merely a moment of injustice into a movement for structural change, exactly the kind of response that Jasmine had advocated for in her work on algorithmic bias detection. Sometimes she realized the most powerful algorithms are not written in code, but in human commitments to identify patterns, correct errors, and continuously improve systems, whether digital or organizational, to better serve all users equally. Autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of a first-class cabin as Jasmine Reynolds settled into Seat 1A on Global Journey Airlines Flight 437. The same flight number, same route, same seat, where everything had begun exactly 1 year earlier. The symmetry was intentional, a deliberate choice to mark the anniversary not just of an incident, but of the transformation it had catalyzed. At 18, Jasmine carried herself with the same quiet confidence, though now it was enhanced by a year of extraordinary experiences. She had completed her freshman year at MIT with perfect grades while simultaneously guiding the Equal Skies initiative through its crucial early development. The foundation had grown from concept to reality, employing a staff of 22 and partnering with over 40 corporations across multiple service industries. As she arranged her belongings, Jasmine noticed subtle changes in the first-class cabin. A more diverse flight crew, a QR code prominently displayed with information about Global Journey's bias reporting system tablets that flight attendants carried with passenger data deliberately stripped of photos or demographic indicators that might trigger unconscious bias. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Serena Jackson, approached with a warm, professional smile. "Ms. Reynolds, welcome aboard. Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "Just water, please," Jasmine replied, appreciating the simple respect in the interaction. No excessive deference because of who she was. Now, no suspicion about whether she belonged, just the straightforward courtesy that should be every passenger's experience. Serena returned with the water, then hesitated briefly. "Ms. Reynolds, I hope it is not inappropriate, but I wanted to thank you personally. The changes implemented after last year's incident have transformed our work environment. Many of us feel proud of the airline again." Jasmine nodded, touched by the sincere acknowledgement. "That is good to hear. Organizational change is hard. It only works when the people within the system believe in it." As boarding continued, a business executive took the seat across the aisle, an older white man in a tailored suit who reminded her slightly of William Peterson from the original flight. He did a double-take upon recognizing her. "You are Jasmine Reynolds," he said. "I saw your TED Talk last month. Brilliant framework for detecting pattern-based discrimination in complex systems." "Thank you," she replied, still somewhat uncomfortable with being recognized by strangers. "I am Jonathan Mercer, Chief Compliance Officer at Goldman Sachs," he continued. "We have been implementing your FAIR protocol in our lending algorithms. The results have been eye-opening. We found bias patterns we did not know existed." Their conversation continued through the boarding process, focusing on technical aspects of bias detection in financial systems. It was the kind of professional exchange that would have been unimaginable a year earlier when Jasmine was perceived first through the lens of her age and race, rather than her expertise and contributions. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Captain Diana Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Global Journey Flight 437 to London. Before we take off, I want to acknowledge that today marks 1 year since an incident on this very flight route that transformed our airline's approach to equitable service. Many of you may be aware of the changes implemented since then. Those changes are not just corporate policy. They represent our renewed commitment to ensuring every passenger is treated with dignity and respect. The announcement was unusual. Airlines typically avoided calling attention to past failures, but it reflected Global Journey's new transparency-focused culture. Rather than hiding from history, they were acknowledging it as a catalyst for positive change. Jasmine felt her phone vibrate with an incoming text. A message from her father. "Proud of you, Jazz. Look at what you have built from that moment. Love you." She smiled, typing back, "Just getting started. Still so much work to do." And there was indeed much work remaining. Despite significant progress, bias detection systems were still evolving, still being refined based on implementation data and outcomes. Some companies had embraced the frameworks enthusiastically, while others had adopted them superficially without committing to the deeper cultural changes required for lasting impact. The Equal Skies initiative had expanded beyond transportation into retail, healthcare, and financial services, each sector presenting unique challenges for identifying and addressing bias patterns. The work was complex, sometimes frustrating, occasionally exhilarating when breakthrough moments occurred. As the aircraft gained altitude, banking gently toward the Atlantic, Jasmine opened her laptop to review the presentation she would deliver at the World Economic Forum, an unprecedented invitation for someone her age. The topic: Beyond Algorithms Applying Bias Detection Frameworks to Human Systems. The core argument remained the same as her keynote a year earlier, but now enhanced with data from actual implementations across multiple industries. The theoretical framework had been tested in real-world environments, refined based on outcomes, and continuously improved through feedback loops. Exactly the process she advocated for both digital and human systems. Looking out the window at the receding coastline of New York, Jasmine reflected on the journey of the past year. What had begun as a humiliating experience, being singled out, accused, threatened with removal, had transformed into a catalyst for change far beyond one airline or one passenger's dignity. The Equal Skies initiative now had partnerships with over 40 corporations, foundations, and academic institutions. Its bias detection frameworks were being implemented in systems affecting millions of customer interactions daily. Its training programs had certified hundreds of corporate leaders in equitable service practices. And perhaps most significantly, it had shifted the conversation from treating bias as inevitable to treating it as detectable and correctable through systematic approaches. None of this would have happened without that confrontation in first class a year ago. A painful moment that had been transformed into purpose. A single incident that had revealed structural patterns, an individual humiliation that had catalyzed institutional change. As Flight 437 reached cruising altitude, Jasmine closed her laptop and leaned back in her seat, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. The journey was not complete. Bias detection and correction was ongoing work, not a destination to be reached. But meaningful progress had been made, systems had been improved, and patterns that once operated unchecked were now visible and addressable. Sometimes the most important journeys began with the most difficult moments. This flight, from New York to London, from confrontation to transformation, was proof of that. The wheels of Flight 437 touched down at Heathrow Airport with the gentle bump and squeal that signaled the physical conclusion of a journey that had come full circle. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, Jasmine gazed out at the familiar landscape of London, so different from when she had first arrived a year earlier, not the city itself, but the circumstances of her presence within it. Then she had been a 17-year-old prodigy recovering from public humiliation, determined to deliver her keynote despite the emotional turbulence. Now, she returned as the founder of a respected initiative invited to address global leaders about the systematic approaches to bias detection and correction that had grown from that difficult moment. The aircraft reached its gate and passengers began the usual choreography of disembarking, collecting belongings, filing into the aisle, moving toward the exit in an orderly procession. Jasmine waited patiently in no rush to leave her seat. As she prepared to join the queue, Serena, the lead flight attendant, approached once more. "Miss Reynolds, before you go, I wanted to give you something." She handed Jasmine a small envelope. "The crew collected this. We thought you might appreciate it." Curious. Jasmine opened the envelope to find a card signed by every member of the flight crew along with a simple note. "Thank you for making us better. Your courage changed our airline." The gesture was unexpected and touching, an acknowledgement not from corporate executives implementing policy changes, but from the frontline staff whose daily interactions had been transformed by those changes. "Thank you," Jasmine said, genuinely moved. "This means more than you know." As she walked through the jet bridge toward the terminal, Jasmine noticed a young black girl, perhaps 12 or 13, watching her with wide-eyed recognition. The girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered something, then approached hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a hint of a London accent. "Are you Jasmine Reynolds?" Jasmine smiled, nodding. I am Zora." The girl continued. "I am learning to code because of you. I watched your TED Talk with my class, and our teacher told us about what happened on the plane last year." Her mother stepped forward. "You have been an inspiration to her. She has already built a simple algorithm to analyze bias in school disciplinary actions. Found some pretty striking patterns, too." Jasmine knelt slightly to meet Zora at eye level. "That sounds like important work. The world needs more people asking those questions and building those tools." "Were you scared?" Zora asked suddenly, "when they treated you that way on the plane?" The question was direct, honest, in the way children often are. Jasmine considered it carefully. "Yes," she admitted. "I was scared and embarrassed and angry, but I knew I had to stand my ground because I had not done anything wrong." Zora nodded solemnly. "My mom says sometimes the hard moments make us stronger." "Your mom is very wise," Jasmine replied, glancing up with a smile at the woman who was raising such a thoughtful daughter. "And sometimes those hard moments show us exactly what needs to change in the world, which means they also show us exactly what work we are meant to do." As they parted ways in the terminal, Jasmine watched the young girl walk away, animated now as she chatted excitedly with her mother. In that brief exchange, the journey had truly come full circle. From experiencing discrimination to inspiring a new generation to build better detection systems and create more equitable environments. One incident, one flight, one moment of standing firm had rippled outward in ways Jasmine could never have anticipated. The circle was complete, but the ripples continued to spread, touching lives and systems far beyond that first-class cabin where it had all begun. Jasmine Reynolds stood at the edge of the South Bank, gazing across the Thames at London's skyline as evening descended. The iconic structures, Tower Bridge, the Shard, the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, were illuminated against the deepening blue of twilight, their reflections shimmering on the river's surface. She had just concluded her address at the World Economic Forum, where global leaders had listened intently to her framework for applying bias detection systems across industries. The response had been overwhelmingly positive, with commitments from several major corporations to implement pilot programs in partnership with the Equal Skies initiative. Her phone buzzed with the notification. The video of her speech was already being shared widely, with comments praising both the technical framework and the personal journey that had inspired it. 1 year ago, a flight attendant had looked at a 17-year-old black girl and decided she did not belong in first class. That moment of discrimination could have remained just another indignity to be endured, another story to be told, another reason to be angry or resigned. Instead, it had become a catalyst for structural change, not because Jasmine had special privilege or power, but because she had refused to accept unequal treatment, and because others had recognized the injustice and chosen to stand with her. The Equal Skies initiative was now working with companies across multiple industries, helping them implement bias detection frameworks that could identify and address discriminatory patterns before they resulted in harmful experiences. The work was technical and methodical: data analysis, pattern recognition, statistical modeling, but its impact was deeply human. Every time a customer was treated with equal dignity regardless of appearance, every time a qualified applicant received fair consideration, regardless of background, every time a patient received appropriate care, regardless of ethnicity, these human moments of equity and respect were the true measure of the initiative's success. As Jasmine watched the lights of London reflected on the Thames, she thought about the countless people whose daily experiences were shaped by the systems, both technical and human, that surrounded them. Most would never know when bias detection frameworks had prevented discriminatory treatment. They would simply experience the dignity and respect that should have been theirs all along. That was the ultimate goal, not recognition or accolades, but the quiet transformation of systems to better serve all people equally. The work was not finished; it had barely begun. Bias detection was an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. But meaningful progress had been made and momentum was building. One person standing firm against injustice could make a difference. One moment of discrimination could be transformed into a movement for equity. One algorithm could help detect patterns invisible to the naked eye. One framework could guide organizations toward more just and inclusive practices. The lights across the river grew brighter as darkness fell completely. Jasmine took one last look at the city before turning to head back to her hotel. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more implementation planning, more work toward systems that treated people with equal dignity. The journey that had begun in Seat 1A of Flight 437 continued. Not a circle completed, but a spiral expanding outward, touching more lives, improving more systems, creating more moments where people were seen and respected for who they were rather than judged by how they looked. That was a journey worth taking, one step at a time, one system at a time, one change at a time, until Equal Skies were not just an initiative's name, but a reality for all. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories of dignity, courage, and change. Remember that each of us has the power to stand firm when faced with injustice, and together we can create systems that treat everyone with the respect they deserve. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination and stood your ground? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your experience could inspire others to speak up when it counts. Thank you for watching. And until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is simply refusing to be diminished.